Chapter 862. In the dragon-subduing path, Elder Chu was unwilling to let Zhang Yan go. He said to the people below, "Fellow Taoists, we're guarding this place. If this person messes up Jinren Yang's plan, we won't be able to get away with it. Who's going after him with me?" Everyone looked at each other, then shook their heads. Someone even smiled bitterly. "Elder Chu, don't joke around." They had clearly seen Zhang Yan's power just now. Even the joint attack of dozens of magic treasures could do nothing to him. If he didn't have a treasure on him, then he must have cultivated some powerful divine ability. Even if they chased after him, it would be useless. Elder Chu said seriously, "I don't want you to fight him. I want you to help him when he meets Jinren Yang. What do you think?" Priest Xiao looked around and raised his voice in agreement. "Everyone, don't worry. I've already sent out a message. Spiritual Master Chao and the others will be here soon. Everyone here has a high level of cultivation. Can't they just delay for a little while?" Everyone present was silent. Even so, the risk was great. Not all of them were disciples of Hunching sect. Some were itinerant cultivators from the spiritual sect, and some were here on orders from the sect to help. They were willing to help, but they were unwilling to risk their lives. When Elder Chu saw that no one responded, he raised his voice and said, "Everyone, if anyone is willing to go with me, I can double the reward after this." As soon as these words were spoken, it immediately attracted the attention of many people. "Really? Elder Chu isn't bluffing? If that's the case, I'm willing to go." Priest Xiao took the opportunity to say, "I just now thinking. Zhang Yan won't be unscathed even if he goes there just now. He might be meditating somewhere. Let's go now. We might be able to take advantage of him." Although it was just speculation, it was not impossible. Finally, more than 10 people stood up and were willing to go after him. Elder Chu was afraid that something might happen if they delayed too long. He chanted a spell and released a Dharma boat. Then, he called everyone up, waved his horsetail whisk, and flew up into the sky. After traveling for a few miles, Elder Chu's expression suddenly changed. He asked, "Did you guys hear something?" Taoist Xiao listened carefully, and after a while, he also revealed a surprised expression. Following the direction of the sound, he saw a golden cloud flying over from the other side. However, when he approached it and looked carefully, he noticed to his shock that this cloud was actually formed from countless strange insects, and he couldn't help but gasp. He exclaimed, "Where did this insect come from?" Elder Chu said loudly, "Everyone, please be careful. I'm afraid it's Zhang Yan's doing." Zhang Yan's objective was to kill Yang Poyu. However, when he thought of the fact that Yang Poyu had some kind of protective treasure, he decided to avoid any hindrance from behind. Thus, he left these bloodline gold worms at the mountain pass. This was mainly to obstruct Chao Yu and the others, but unexpectedly, Elder Chu and the others had barged in first. Elder Chu wanted to dodge. However, the insects were fast, and they were coming at him from the front, making it difficult for him to dodge. Moreover, they had more than 10 Yuanying cultivators with them, and there was no reason for them to turn around and leave before they even encountered the insects. Thus, he quickly opened the restriction array on the Dharma boat. Seeing the spiritual light, the bloodline gold worms were like mosquitoes smelling blood. They became excited and let out earth-shattering hisses. The entire blood cloud surged up and wrapped around the Dharma boat, biting it. At first, Elder Chu thought that the restriction array would be able to block the insects, but after a while, he realized that something was wrong. Under the sharp teeth of these strange insects, the restriction array was like a piece of paper. In just a few breaths, more than half of the restriction array was gone, and no matter how much he circulated his spiritual energy, he couldn't stop the insects. He hurriedly said, "Everyone, let's attack together." When the others here saw this scene, they were similarly unable to sit still, and they all withdrew their defensive magic treasures and attacked downwards. However, not long after, everyone's expression changed. These strange insects seemed to have the ability to pollute spiritual opportunity. After the treasures spun a few rounds in the sea of insects, the spiritual light gradually disappeared, and they hurriedly kept them back. However, all of them had a pained expression on their faces. The originally bright treasures were now dim as if they were covered with a thin layer of dust. Seeing that their method couldn't work, everyone was a little anxious. Someone complained, "If I knew this, I wouldn't have come." Taoist Xiao quietly went to Elder Chu's side and said, "Elder Chu, we can't do this. We should leave." Elder Chu pondered for a while and felt that there was no way to deal with these strange insects, so he reluctantly nodded. Hearing his words, everyone immediately flew out of the Dharma boat and returned to where they came from. At this moment, a faint red blood cloud suddenly bloomed above everyone, and a blood insect that was the length of a finger leaped out from it. Its body was transparent like colored glass, but there was a dark red blood line on its back. It looked extremely ferocious and terrifying. Its bloodshot eyes turned and stared at one of the people. Suddenly, it shot out like a blood line, penetrated the protective treasure light, and pounced on the person's back. Then, it stabbed the person with its needle-like mouth. That person felt that something was wrong and wanted to scream. However, he realized that his body was numb and he couldn't exert any strength. Not long after, he was sucked dry and became a piece of bloody skin. After sucking that person, the blood insect wasn't satisfied and immediately rushed to the next target. That person also died without saying a word. As the blood insect wasn't big, it flew as fast as an arrow, and everyone was busy trying to escape. Only after it killed 3 people did they realize that something was wrong. Each of them shouted, stopped, and took out their treasures to attack. Since the blood insect couldn't fight head-on with them, it immediately retreated far away. However, if the people rode on the conveyance lights, it would immediately follow them. As such, it managed to kill another person. Left with no choice, everyone stopped their guard. However, this blood insect only circled in the sky and didn't come down. Taoist Xiao was knowledgeable and said, "Oh no, this is the insect king. It's waiting for the insect swarm to come up." Apart from Elder Chu, the rest of the people were panicking. Under the insect swarm's attack, it was impossible for them to survive. When the insect king flew too fast, even the protective treasure light couldn't protect them. If they just ran away like this, it would be difficult for them to avoid its sneak attack. They would die if they ran, but they would die if they didn't. Elder Chu said calmly, "Everyone, don't panic. If we split up, we'll lose our strength. We'll work together and defend carefully. As long as we can hold on until perfected Master Yang and the others arrive, we'll be fine." Taoist Xiao struggled for a long time and apologized, "Elder Chu, forgive me for not being able to accompany you." He took out a bronze bracelet and tossed it above his head, releasing a treasure light to cover his body. Then, he turned around and flew away. Everyone thought that he would definitely die, but to their surprise, the crimson bug did not chase after him. When the others saw this, they immediately became restless. After a while, they saw that the insect was still motionless, but the insect swarm was approaching. Someone shouted, "Let's go." As soon as this was said, everyone immediately scattered and ran for their lives. Elder Chu showed a helpless expression. He would die if he stayed alone, so he could only join them. The blood insect's red eyes revealed a hint of slyness. Ever since it was nourished by Zhang Yan's Junyang essence, its intelligence was not lower than that of ordinary cultivators. It knew that after eating these Yuanying cultivators, it would be one step closer to transforming. However, it was not easy to deal with everyone together. Just now, it deliberately forced everyone to scatter so that it could hunt them one by one. Now that its plan had succeeded, it let out a shrill cry and chased after them. At this moment, outside the Devil's Cave, because Lu Yenny and the other 2 had escaped, the Devil's Sect's previous plan had failed. Do Hongping and the others were no longer restrained, so they raised their spirits and fought with the Devil's Sect cultivators. Although they couldn't use their full strength under the attack of the demonic insect, because they were backed by the lofty cloud tower, they didn't have to worry about retreating. They didn't restrain themselves and attacked boldly. If they felt that they couldn't withstand it, they could just hide inside and no one could do anything to them. As a result, the battle unknowingly fell into a stalemate. At this moment, a letter flew from below. Qiao Yu glanced at the mark on it and knew that it must be important, but he didn't say anything until he forced the Xian men back again. Only then did he get out of the battle. He leisurely went to the back and grabbed the letter. He opened it and hurriedly read it. His face was still calm, but his heart was raging. He pondered for a moment and sent a message. Not long after, the others also rushed over. He said in a low voice, "Everyone, there's no need to be entangled here. Find a chance to retreat." Ji Huanchen asked, "Daoist Qiao, did something happen down there?" Qiao Yu nodded and said, "Everyone, did you hear the tremor just now?" Ji Huanchen said, "We all heard it." Qiao Yu sighed and said, "Zhang Yan has already broken through the path of subduing dragon just now. I'm afraid he's already at the innermost part of the spirit cave." Everyone's heart couldn't help but jump. Liao Daoren couldn't help but ask, "Was this person injured?" Qiao Yu shook his head. The letter was vague. "I'm afraid it was written in a hurry." "But if he was injured, he would have mentioned it." Ji Huanchen sighed and said, "Daoist Yang is in danger." Zhang Yan's transcendence energy was something that they had experienced just now. Even with the power of one person, he did not fall into a disadvantageous position against all of them. If Yang Poyu were to face him alone, the chances of him winning would be next to nothing. At this moment, Qiao Yu said meaningfully, "That might not be the case. If Daoist Yang knows how to choose, it won't be difficult for him to keep his life." The few people present couldn't help but look at each other. The so-called choice was nothing more than Yang Pingyu no longer being obsessed with the idea of becoming a heavenly abode. He would take the initiative to escape in advance, so that he could save his life. But they all understood that at that time, if someone among them could grasp the opportunity, they could replace him and use the opportunity to become a heavenly abode. Qiao Yu knew what the others would think, but he thought highly of himself and didn't want to take this path. He only said, "Let's not talk about Daoist Yang first. When Zhang Yan reaches the inner room, he will definitely find a way to light the clear spirit incense. If the heavenly abode of Xianmen comes, it'll be useless even if we get the spirit cave. We need to stop them quickly." This matter directly involved the success or failure of this battle. As for the people of Xianmen outside, he didn't have time to think about it now. Ji Huanchen looked to the side and also solemnly reminded, "Everyone, don't prioritize later. Even if you miss the opportunity this time, as long as the spirit cave is still there, there's still a chance." Jin Xianyuan nodded and said, "Daoist Ji's reminder is right. Let's get rid of Zhang Yan first. As for everything else, let's put it aside for now." After they came to an agreement, they no longer paid attention to the 9 cloud watchtowers. They turned around and fled into the depths of the spirit cave, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Chapter 863. After Zhang Yan left the dragon subduing path, he arrived at a spacious cave hall in the time it took to drink a cup of tea. There was a high platform on the wall with a hunching sect's starry banner. Under the protection of the spiritual light, a cultivator who looked like a disciple was looking at him in fear. Zhang Yan glanced at him. This person was only at the core transformation realm and should be the disciple on duty here. Yang Poyu should not be far from here. He did not pay much attention to him. He activated his mana and continued to fly downwards. The deeper he went, the greater the pressure around him. It was as if he was entering the deep sea. Because he had experience breaking the devil's cave in the north and east, he was not surprised. He only held back his mana to avoid being hurt by the spiritual vigor. Not far away, there was a deep cave below. The spiritual vigor was unusually turbulent, like 100 rivers flowing into the sea. Without looking, he knew that this was the right path to the devil's cave. Just as he was about to go down, he saw something floating in the air. He paused and looked carefully. What he saw was a snow-white feather. With a slight sense, he could vaguely sense a weak spiritual vigor. However, it was not obvious under the cover of the spiritual tide. If he only focused on going in just now, he might miss it. He thought for a while and threw a few paper talismans to test it. However, before he could go far, he was pulled in by the strong wind. Seeing this scene, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. In this place, only third-stage realm cultivators like him could fly around, and ordinary nascent soul cultivators would find it difficult to move an inch. However, this piece of feather was able to float freely and wasn't swept away by the spirit tide. It was not that simple. It was most likely a trick set up by the devil sect. What he had to be more careful about was that this feather was just what he saw. There might be more hidden in the dark. If he went down rashly, he did not need any earth-shattering tricks. He just needed to stir up some spiritual vigor. If he was pulled in, even he did not dare to say that he could survive. After thinking for a while, he summoned the flying sword in the sky. It split into a sharp sword gleam and slashed down. Unexpectedly, when the sword light brushed past, the feather softly bent and spun around in place. However, he was not injured at all. Zhang Yan was not disappointed. His sword was meant to probe. From its spiritual vigor, it was clear that this item was a top-grade magical treasure. As such, it would not be difficult to deal with it. He smiled faintly and retrieved his flying sword. Then, he charged straight down the cliff. The feather suddenly shook, and as if it was attracted by something, it floated towards him. Zhang Yan stared straight at it. When it got close, he willed it, and a spot of clear light flew out from between his brows. Accompanied by a soft sound, it attached itself to the feather and froze it in midair, unable to move. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he flicked his sleeve and released a small stream of water light. With a gentle sweep, he sucked it in. When his mana revolved, he released and retracted it immediately. Although the surrounding spiritual vigor was affected, it did not set off much of a wave before it calmed down. However, at this moment, more than 10 identical feathers surged out from the surroundings. Some were big and some were small, and as if they had locked onto him, they all flew towards where he was. Zhang Yan was secretly surprised. As expected, there was more than one feather. Perhaps what he saw now was not all of them. He did not clash with it directly, but he rode on the sword gleam and wandered. Although there was something mysterious about this feather, it was too slow. As long as he was careful, it would not pose much of a threat to him. He repeated what he did just now. He used the longevity sealing cicada to freeze it in place and held onto the spiritual vigor. After that, he used the water light to collect them one by one. After a short while, he had completely cleared it. After carefully checking again, and seeing that there were no more hidden traps, he continued to travel downwards. After a few miles, the land in front of him gradually became wider. After a few twists and turns, his eyes suddenly lit up. Under the ground, there was actually a bright light, and it illuminated the place as if it was daytime. He raised his eyes and looked down. Below him, there was a hole that was 1,000 feet wide. It was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. About half a mile away, there was an exquisite pavilion that was about 10 feet tall. A Taoist dressed in white with a cold expression was sitting alone in the pavilion. Seeing his arrival, the person was startled. His eyes were filled with vigilance. Then, he slowly stood up, raised his hand and bowed. He said, "I didn't expect it to be Jinren Zhang from Qinsong. Sorry for not coming out to greet you." Zhang Yan raised his hand and bowed. He smiled faintly, "Jinren Yang, this is not the land of your spiritual gate." Yang Poyu smiled and said confidently, "It's only a matter of time." He hadn't been here for long, but he didn't think that the celestial sect of wonders would be able to defeat Chao Yu and the others in such a short period of time. There must be someone trying to delay them, leaving Zhang Yan alone to break through to this place to prevent him from entering the heavenly passage. Zhang Yan said faintly, "Then come and fight with I." As he was speaking, a sword gleam had already flown out and was hanging above. Yang Poyu said coldly, "My life is not easy to take. What supernatural power do you have, Jinren Zhang? Feel free to use it." He spread out his sleeves and sat down again. At this point, due to the limitation of spiritual opportunity, a cultivator was like being shackled. Even if he had the 9 wounds hidden smoke escape, he dared not use it casually. However, he knew that his opponent was the same. He dared not use any powerful supernatural power, so it was not difficult for him to defend himself. Zhang Yan shook his body lightly, and a thin golden light flew out from his back. It swept across the whole area, and its length could not be seen. With a flash, it came slashing towards Yang Poyu. Yang Poyu was alarmed, and he frowned. He said, "I wanted to use this method later, but I don't think I can block it now." Although he had a protective true weapon, he had already used it when Han Wonka broke the formation, so it might not listen to him anymore. Fortunately, he still had a supernatural power, so it was enough to deal with it. He immediately cast a spell, and a layer of faint gray light floated up from his body. The golden light arrived in a flash, but when it slashed towards him, it seemed to be hit by a layer of invisible shadow, and it passed through his body. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows, and with a move of his mind, the flying sword had already arrived. However, it was met with the same fate, and it could not hit the person at all. Yang Poyu sneered, "Jinren Zhang, don't waste your effort. Although I can't defeat you, you might not be able to defeat me." In order to successfully enter the Grotto Heaven realm, he had made many preparations. He had even thought about how he would defend himself if a powerful enemy suddenly broke into the spirit cave at a critical moment. In order to deal with the situation in front of him, he specially cultivated a technique that only cultivators of the third realm could use, the Yuan Tong external body. This supernatural power could be used to refine an item to take on a calamity for the user. It could be used 3 times in a lifetime, and before the item was destroyed, the user would be completely unharmed. Previously, when he faced Shirhan's Han and his wife, he also used this technique to take on the killing sword. It was different from the blood soul sect's borrowing object to replace shape. After this technique was used, the cultivator would not be able to hurt the enemy. He could only sit and watch the enemy attack. His own safety was completely dependent on the item he was refining. The item he chose was called Golden Luo Vine. This item grew tens of thousands of feet underground, attached to the roots of the East Flower continent, and only grew the length of a finger after tens of thousands of years. Its toughness. Even some true weapons could not compare to it. Because of this, he asked the Grotto Heaven in the sect to personally take action, and after many years of hard work, he finally managed to take a section. Therefore, he was not afraid at all. Even the methods of the people in the Grotto Heaven could not hurt this item, not to mention the Yuanying cultivators. Even if a true weapon came, it could still block it. Zhang Yan attacked a few times. Although he could not hurt the enemy, he could see some tricks. Not to mention that Yang Poyu did not block at all, he did not even counterattack once. If he did not do it on purpose, then it must be because of the technique on his body, he could not use it, or even his body could not move. His eyes flashed, and he no longer tried to attack his opponent. Instead, he pushed away the fire and took out the clear spirit incense from his sleeve. With a gentle shake, the head of the incense flashed and left his hand. It floated to the center of the devil's cave, and a wisp of spiritual smoke floated up. Yang Poyu looked at it, and his expression was a little gloomy. He scoffed. Once the Yuan Tong external body was used, he could not stop the opponent. Now it was up to Chao Yu and the rest to arrive. The stalemate lasted for 100 breaths. Suddenly, the surroundings shook, and the spiritual vigor was like a tsunami. It was turbulent, but after a while, it calmed down. Yang Poyu was stunned, and immediately felt the mana in his body surging. A mysterious feeling was about to come out, as though it could rise to the clouds at any time. He was ecstatic. This was a sign that the spirit cave was about to solidify, and it would be completely solidified in less than half a minute. When he looked up again, the clear spirit incense in Zhang Yan's hand had only burned a little. Based on the current situation, before the incense burns, the spirit cave would be completely solidified. He laughed loudly and said, "Sage Zhang, in the northern lands, your celestial sect of wonders won a round, but here, my spirit sect has the advantage of luck. The defeat of this battle is not because of you, but because of fate. Zhang Yan's expression froze. He could see the changes here. At this moment, he felt something. When he turned around, he saw rays of light flying out from behind him. It was the people from the Devil's Sect. Yang Poyu's heart was at ease, and he bowed, "Thank you for coming to protect me." When Qiao Yu saw the situation in front of him, he understood and said seriously, "Zhenren Zhang, you have no hope of winning this battle. If you are willing to stop now, we are willing to send you off and will not stop you." The others did not say anything, which meant that they agreed. It was not that they did not want to take Zhang Yan's life, but they were afraid that if they pushed him too hard, he would do something like Han Wanke and Peng Yuzhou. One must know that this was in front of the spirit cave. Even with the protection of the true weapon, once the spiritual tide was triggered, they did not dare to say that they could retreat safely. Zhang Yan thought for a while, and with a wave of his sleeve, a gust of wind blew past, and the clear spirit incense beside him turned into ashes. Qiao Yu was stunned, as though he could not believe that he was so easy to talk to. However, after thinking about it again, he felt relieved. He thought to himself, even if Zhang Yan does not fight for this place, he still has the merit of suppressing the spirit cave in the northern land. At this moment, our spirit gate has the upper hand, so why bother to fight with us? It is reasonable that he is not obsessed with this. Thinking about this, he bowed and said, "Daoist Zhang is indeed a person with a clear heart. Qiao Yu keeps his promise, please do as you wish." Everyone let out a sigh of relief and sneered at the same time. Compared to Han Wanke and Peng Yuzhou, even though Zhang Yan's mana was higher, he had lost his indomitable spirit. When he was surrounded, he chose to protect himself. Even though there was nothing wrong with his actions, it made them look down on him. At this moment, Zhang Yan smiled, and his sharp eyes swept across the crowd. "Everyone, please do not misunderstand. It is still too early to talk about victory and defeat." Chapter 864. As soon as Zhang Yan finished speaking, he waved his sleeves. As he moved, a dragon's roar resounded through the sky. Then, a bright light like the sun rushed out from his body. He looked up at the sky. The movement of the heavens was indeed not something that could be defeated by divine abilities. The demonic cave was about to form, and he naturally couldn't stop it. Although there was a limit to one's strength, it wasn't a dead end. There was still a chance to break through. There were 8 Yuanying third-stage cultivators here. If he could kill all of them in one fell swoop, in addition to Bailey Qingyin and the others, it would be equivalent to him killing most of the top talents in the demonic sect. Even if the demonic cave was formed, he couldn't say he could win. But other than that, there was another possibility. Just now was his real plan. After the spiritual energy rushed out, it continued to rise. Soon, it reached the top of the spirit cave. With a rumble, it came out of the cave and went straight into the sky. Then, the aura from all directions surged over and condensed into the image of a 100-mile-long flood dragon. This phenomenon was seen by all the cultivators of the Xian sect above. They were all shocked and unconsciously stopped the lofty cloud tower. Huang Songquan of the Nanhua sect exclaimed, "Sun-capturing demon flood dragon." He had only seen such an ancient fierce creature in the sect's illustrations. Even though it was just an illusion, its ferocious might couldn't be faked. The flood dragon stretched its huge body, causing the wind and clouds to sway for 1,000 miles. Its aura became stronger and stronger, and gradually, a violent and brutal aura could be released. When the people of the demonic sect sensed that Zhang Yan's tone was unfriendly, they were already on guard. They all felt that something was wrong. Looking at the aura of this fierce creature, it was clearly a killing weapon. Not only that, it was very likely to be a sect's treasure. Qiao Yu's expression changed several times. This attack hadn't even been launched, but it already had such a momentum. Once it landed, it would have a shocking might. At this moment, the only way was to kill Zhang Yan. Only then could he stop it. He hurriedly shouted, "Everyone, hurry up and attack." With this reminder, everyone came to their senses, and they shouted loudly as they attacked Zhang Yan. However, in the depths of the spirit cave, to avoid being pulled into the spiritual tide, they did not dare to use their magic power to cast their Dao techniques. He could only use the treasures on his body to attack the enemy. Fortunately, there were 8 of them against 1 person, so they had the absolute upper hand. There was no reason for them to lose. Zhang Yan stared at the flying Dharma treasures. He didn't dodge in the slightest, and with a wave of his hand, the 9 celestial natal pearls flew up into the sky. With a command from his heart, they instantly emitted an explosion that sounded like mountains collapsing, and then numerous dazzling crystalline lights charged forward without showing the slightest weakness. The 9 origin pearls shot out at the same time, which was equivalent to the combined attack of several treasures of the same origin. It was as if they were crushing dry weeds and smashing the magic treasures into pieces along the way. Afterwards, the 9 rays of light didn't stop and continued on their way. The people of the Devil's sect had never expected that after Zhang Yan had taken out the sun-embracing axe, there would actually be another tyrannical true weapon. Moreover, there was more than one true weapon. A feeling of powerlessness suddenly emerged in their hearts. If it was outside, even if they couldn't block it, they could still think of a way to dodge it. However, in here, the spiritual vigor was restricted, and they couldn't fly freely. They could only face it head-on. Jin Xuanyuan's intuition told him that he couldn't fight against this item. After some calculations, he immediately raised 2 fingers and pointed at his forehead, intending to activate the life-protecting talisman that was given by the sect. However, when his mana was activated, his expression changed. His body only swayed slightly, and he felt that there was a ferocious aura enveloping his body from the sky, as if an axe was placed on his body. If he were to fly at that moment, this attack would most likely land on his head. He immediately stopped his incantation and dared not move recklessly. There was more than one person who had the same thought, but they were all blocked by the aura and couldn't move. At that moment, they couldn't care about anything else. At the same time, they shouted and took out all the true weapons that were given by their masters. They chanted incantations and activated with all their might, forming a colorful spiritual light screen in the sky. In a flash, the natal pearls arrived, and one by one, they collided fiercely. Boom, 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 boom. There was a series of explosions. At that moment, there were no less than 4 true weapons colliding with the natal pearls, and the entire spirit cave seemed like it was about to flip over. In the Donghua continent, ever since several grotto heavens joined forces to kill Zhenren Ru Huang, there had never been a collision of such treasures. Fortunately, this fight wasn't a diversion of supernatural powers, so the spiritual vigor didn't go haywire. Otherwise, everyone here wouldn't even think about surviving. Even so, Chao Yu and the rest were still frightened. However, Zhang Yan didn't seem to have any qualms. Seeing that his attack was blocked, he activated his mana, and the 9 natal pearls attacked again. If he couldn't take care of it in one hit, then he would fight another round. If the situation didn't develop according to his expectations, he would kill all these people here even if he had to use up all the Sky Demon's blood essence. At that moment, in the sky, the flood dragon had already accumulated its chi to the peak. It combined its head and tail, its mouth holding its tail, and its tail wrapping around its head. It spiraled up, and gradually, dazzling light shone in all directions. The splendor flowed, and slowly formed a clasping young mysterious axe. Then, the axe head was slightly raised, and it slashed down towards the bottom of the spirit cave. At that moment, Zhang Yan felt the mana in his body being drawn out like a flood. Fortunately, he had taken the soul-restoring elixir early on, and he was prepared. Just now, he didn't lose his composure. With a turn of his chi, his mana recovered on its own. Chao Yu and the rest were beaten by his storm-like attack just now, and they were in a sorry state. This pause gave them a moment to catch their breath. However, just as this difficulty passed, his tribulation came again. The murderous chi in the sky was coming down with the power to split the heavens and the earth. The people of the Devil's doctrine also knew that this was a moment of life and death. They had no choice but to squeeze out their mana and do their best to deal with it. This time, they didn't hold back. For a long time, all kinds of treasures flashed endlessly, and the light screen formed by several true artifacts was even bigger than just now. At that moment, a fierce roar came from the axe. "Junior, you dare to block the way? Get out of my way." Boom! This time, the impact was more than a few times stronger than the last time. The aftershock spread out, and the surface of the spirit cave was torn open. The true artifacts of the Devil's Doctrine couldn't withstand it. They all wailed and turned into light, flying back into their sleeves. At that moment, there were a few people who felt that the situation wasn't right. They were afraid that if they didn't leave, they would be killed here. They each activated their life protection talismans, and instantly turned into long rainbows, wanting to fly away. However, the big axe suddenly turned around and returned to the body of the flood dragon. It swung its tail forcefully, and as if it had hit hard glass, there was a cracking sound. The treasures of the few people who flew away were all shattered. They were swung down heavily. At that moment, the expressions of several Taoist grotto heavens in the Devil's Doctrine changed. They all felt that their Dharma treasures were heavily damaged. Even those who weren't involved temporarily looked over. In Mount Kunshe, Taoist Master Huan couldn't sit still anymore. He let out a long sigh and suddenly said, "We can't afford to lose our disciples. This time, we can only be shameless." Taoist Master Wei pondered for a moment, then stood up and said, "I'm willing to follow you." The two of them swayed and disappeared without a trace. At the same time, in the floating celestial palace, Qin Mabai opened his eyes, his expression calm. He waved his horsetail whisk and said slowly, "Chen Taiping. Qin Yu, Du Yunzhan, Shao Rongyu, Zhu Zhixing. Sun Jiyan. The six of you, go to the Devil's Cave on Mount Fenglai." Immediately, the 6 Taoist masters stood up and bowed, saying, "Yes, Sect Master." Shaoqing Sect, Pure Swan Palace. Ingchuanxiu suddenly said, "Master." Taoist masters from the demon sect attacked without caring about their reputation. "Do you want to go to Mount Fenglai?" Yu Xianshao said casually, "Don't worry about it. At this point, the outcome has been decided. Fellow Taoists from Qinsang School can deal with it." Ingchuanxiu bowed and said, "Disciple understands." In the Devil's Cave, after the sun-embracing axe lashed out with its tail, it flew up. When it reached the sky, it turned into a dignified young general wearing a black robe and black armor. He looked down and saw that no one was injured just now. He was very dissatisfied with himself. He snorted and thought to himself, "If it wasn't for the fact that I've been restrained for nearly 10,000 years and my strength is not as good as before, I can kill all of you juniors." Although he wanted to attack again, he was restricted by his sect's promise to attack once every 60 years, so he didn't dare to do it again. Zhang Yan didn't care about what he did. Once the true artifacts were destroyed, there were no more obstacles in front of him. He immediately activated his Vitality Pearl. At this moment, everyone from the Devil's faction felt that a great disaster was about to befall them. The defensive magic treasures on their bodies had been destroyed by Zhang Yan, so they didn't have the strength to resist the 9 origin pearls that flew over. Chao Yu looked at the sky and said, "Everyone, I want to leave this avatar, so I'll leave first." Ji Huanchen smiled and said, "I'm willing to accompany you, but it's a pity that I'll help Zhang Yan's reputation." Lu Rongyang said coldly, "He can't escape, so why care about his reputation?" Zhang Yan naturally heard their words clearly, and the meaning behind it was none other than a life and death struggle. However, he remained unmoved in the slightest, and he grinned before pointing forward without the slightest hesitation, causing the 9 origin pearls to suddenly shoot forward. Chao Yu and the others looked on coldly. Just as the 9 spiritual lights were about to reach them, a sigh came from the sky. "Let's stop here." A wave of spiritual qi descended. It seemed thin but it easily blocked the 9 pearls. At the same time, a green-robed Taoist with snow-white eyebrows appeared. Yang Poyu hurriedly bowed and said, Spiritual Master Huan. Spiritual Master Huan nodded and looked at the young general. He bowed and said, Spiritual Master Baoyang, Tai Han Grand Ancestor is a predecessor of Ling's sect. I didn't expect you to join Qinsang. The general snorted and didn't give him any face. He said disdainfully, Junior, it's none of your business who I join. Spiritual Master Huan didn't care and only said, pity. Zhang Yan didn't panic when he saw Spiritual Master Dong Tian. Instead, he calmed down. The situation before him was exactly what he wanted to achieve. Chao Yu, Yang Poyu, Ji Huanchen, and Jin Xianyuan were all the eldest disciples of their respective sects and were expected to achieve the heavenly abode. Each of them had an extremely high status in their respective sections. Apart from the enlightened master of the heavenly abode, no one could rival them. If they were all killed here, it wouldn't be as simple as losing a few third-stage cultivators. It would be a heavy blow to the prestige of the sects and the morale of the disciples. In his mind, if he forced this junior into a dead end, Spiritual Master Dong Tian of the Devil's sect might not be able to resist and protect him. But if that happened, the grotto heavens of Qinsang School would have an excuse to intervene. No matter if the Devil's Cave was formed or not, the profound sect would win. As for whether he could do it or not, he wasn't sure. But it was worth a try. At the very least, he could kill Chao Yu and the others. At this moment, perfected Master Huan's gaze fell on Zhang Yan. Under the hostile gaze of a perfected Master Dong Tian, Zhang Yan was still calm and fearless. He couldn't help but feel a trace of killing intent. The defeat of Ling's sect could be said to be due to this person. If he didn't get rid of him, he would be a great disaster in the future. Now, he only needed to move his fingers slightly to kill this person. Chapter 865. Spiritual Master Huan was weighing the pros and cons in his mind, but he didn't show any abnormalities on the surface. Although others couldn't sense the murderous intent he was faintly revealing, he couldn't hide it from Spiritual Master Wei, who had come with him. The latter was shocked and couldn't be bothered to conceal himself anymore. He revealed himself in midair and intentionally blocked Qin Shi's path before he asked in a serious voice, Fellow Taoist, what are you trying to do? Spiritual Master Huan's expression didn't change. He only glanced at her. When Jin Xianyuan saw the Taoist master of the Dongtian sect, he hurriedly came over and saluted. Taoist Master Wei didn't look at him and only waved his hand. His gaze never left Taoist Master Huan as he faintly warned, the implications of this matter are not small. Fellow Taoist, please be careful. Enlightened Master Huan didn't speak for a long while. Finally, he said slowly, Fellow Taoist, don't worry. I know what's important. Tao Master Wei let out a sigh of relief, but after thinking about it for a bit, he still felt a bit uneasy. He cupped his hands and said, Tao brother, there's no point in staying here any longer. I will take my leave first. Spiritual Master Huan didn't stop him. He bowed in return and said, Please, fellow Taoist. This spirit cave was originally used by the disciples of the Hunqing sect to form a heavenly abode. As a heavenly abode in the sect, now that he had come out to meddle in the affairs of the younger generation, he naturally could not get out of it. He had to stay behind and give an explanation to the celestial sect to prevent any unexpected consequences. Reverend Wei said to Jin Xianyuan, Follow me back. Jin Xianyuan did not dare to disobey and said, Yes, sir. Taoist Master Wei nodded at Taoist Master Huan and gently waved his sleeve, sprinkling out clear light that enveloped Taoist Master Huan. Then, he soared into the clouds and leaped into the sky in a flash. Just as he was outside, he suddenly heard the sound of water and fire lingering in his ears. The sound of vibrating air rang out again, reverberating endlessly. This sound gradually sank until it disappeared completely. She sighed softly. This was the last change before the spirit cave condensed. However, since they had chosen to appear to protect their disciple, no matter what happened here, it had nothing to do with them. Inside the Devil's Cave, Chao Yu knew that once Spiritual Master Huan appeared, the Qinsang School's Spiritual Master Dong Tian would not sit idly by. Perhaps he was already on his way here. Now that things had come to this point, it wasn't appropriate for juniors like them to intervene. It wouldn't be appropriate for them to stay any longer. He immediately bade farewell and said, Taoist Master Huan. This disciple should also return to the sect. Taoist Master Huan was very polite to him. He said, this time I have to trouble your honorable sect to provide us with great assistance. I am deeply grateful. In the future, I will personally pay a visit to your esteemed sect leader. Chao Yu said, Jinren is too serious. Lu Rongnyang. Ji Huanchen, Su Yenzhong, and Ji Huanchen knew that there was nothing they could do, so they came to bid their farewells. Enlightened Master Huan said, there are 9 majestic cloud watchtowers blocking the way outside. I'm afraid it won't be easy for you to leave. I'll send you on your way. The 3 of them expressed their gratitude. Spiritual Master Huan channeled his magic power and several beams of spiritual light appeared on the ground. In the blink of an eye, the 3 of them were teleported away. Only then did he have the time to look at Zhang Yan and say indifferently, Spiritual Master Zhang, please stay for a moment. Zhang Yan knew that Taoist Master Huan was afraid that once the people from Qinsang school arrived, they would attack without asking for the reason. Thus, he wanted to make him stay and talk to him later. He didn't want to imprison him. He smiled and bowed, then went to the side to adjust his qi. Ji and Su arrived outside the spirit cave and were about to use their escape technique when an invisible qi enveloped them and grabbed them. They couldn't move at all. They were shocked and wanted to struggle, but a voice said in their ears, don't panic. Follow me. Hearing that it was Taoist Master Gai's voice, the 2 of them relaxed. A moment later, the scene in front of them changed. They found themselves on top of a mountain. This place wasn't far from the spirit cave and was only about 100 miles away. They were confused and didn't know why he brought them here. Taoist Master Gai looked ahead and said in a deep voice, the spirit cave will be condensed in at most 10 breaths. Although you are not here, if I help you with all my strength and use my heart to understand the mysterious changes, you may be able to form a cave. But if you fail, you will have no hope of achieving great Tao in the future. Which one of you is willing to try? Taoist Huan's help gave him a chance to make a fuss. But after all, they were not in the spirit cave, so he still needed his help. Whether they could succeed or not depended on their own fate. When Ji Huanchen heard this, his heart was instantly moved. Amongst this generation, only Yuan Hongyang, Bailey Qingyin, and Chao Yu had the chance to form a heavenly passage without the help of external objects. He knew that he didn't have the confidence to do so, but after thinking about it again, he shook his head. As the eldest disciple of the sect, he still had a chance in the future. There was no need to rush now. He bowed and said, disciple is willing to give the opportunity to junior brother Su. Su Yenzhong was stunned. Then he cupped his hands and said gratefully, thank you, eldest senior brother. In 1,000 years, there would be 3 major trials. If he didn't enter the cave, he would be a pawn and could die at any time. Just now, if Jinren Wuhuan came to save him, he would have died under Zhang Yan's magic weapon. Therefore, no matter how dangerous it was, he had to fight for it. He took a few steps forward and bowed, saying, Taoist Master Gai, disciple is willing. Taoist Master Gai nodded and said, time is pressing. I will teach you the incantation now. Sit down and listen carefully. Su Yenzhong sat down cross-legged. Because of the cave's protection, he had no worries. He put aside his thoughts and started the incantation to meditate when he heard the transmission. If one wanted to form a cave outside the cave, the most important step was to connect with the spiritual vigor. This could only be done before the cave was formed. If he missed it, there would be no more chances. Just now, when he faced Zhang Yan's 9 Yuanming beads, he thought that he would die for sure. Indeed, he had the idea of perishing together with Zhang Yan. After a round on the road of life and death, he was inexplicably touched. At this moment, he tried to comprehend it. After about 10 breaths, he felt that the surroundings were suddenly quiet, as if he was in a clear world of clouds. The surrounding qi was like the sea, surging violently. However, it seemed that in this seemingly chaotic spiritual vigor, there was a mysterious rhythm. Every time his mind tried to catch it, it would escape. He was not anxious. Taoist Master Guy had already mentioned this situation in the incantation. He needed to open the Dharmacaya's chi aperture to connect with it. After forming the Dharmakaya, in order to prevent the gang chi from wearing it down, he needed to close the aperture. He only opened it for a moment when he used the Heavenly Way technique. At this moment, when he opened it, his body suddenly trembled. He felt that his primordial spirit mana had merged with an indescribable thing. He could not help but understand that the success or failure of this move depended on the word, borrow. If this thing could be completely connected, then he would definitely succeed. After a long time, there was suddenly light in front of him. His body became more and more spiritual, as if he had gotten rid of a heavy burden. His mana was like a tide, rising layer by layer. He did not know that the place where he was sitting had been piled up with a layer of white jade. It was like a pagoda surrounding him. Looking carefully, it was actually all condensed by dense mist. Taoist Master Guy looked and could not help but be surprised. He did not expect that Su Yanzhong would be so compatible with the spiritual vigor. If he was in the cave, he would definitely be able to enter the cave realm. At this moment, even if he was outside, he had more than a 50% chance. It was a pity that his physical body was not here. Otherwise, he would have a higher chance. He originally had the mentality of giving it a try, but now he could not help but take it seriously. In order to prevent people from disturbing him, he threw a treasure into the sky, covering the top of the mountain. This method was not afraid of being seen by others for at least half an hour. If he could really achieve the cave realm, naturally he would not have to worry anymore. But at this moment, his expression suddenly tightened and he looked up. Above the cave, the spiritual waves were like the sea, and the lightning was like flames. It was like the heavenly flood was surging, and the boundless gang chi was mixed with the clouds in the sky. It was almost like it could shake the heaven and earth. After a breath or two, the clouds in the sky were like a thin layer of silk. It was suddenly pulled away, and behind it, 6 Taoists appeared. Each of them was on a precious weapon cloud raft, and their bodies were covered with spiritual light. They were so majestic that one could not look at them directly. Jinren Chen was at the front. He looked down and said, "We need to get Zhang Yan out first, then we can suppress it." Sun Ji said, "If all of us go down, I'm afraid that we, the Qinsang school, are oppressing people with our power. The 5 of you can just wait here, I will go down alone." Jinren Chen tilted his head and slowly said to Qin Yu, "Jinren Qin, what do you think?" Qin Yu said casually, "Jinren Chen, you can make the decision. The earlier we finish it, the earlier we can go back." Powerful people from all over Donghua were all looking over. She didn't like the situation. Jinren Chen thought for a moment and said decisively, "We can't wait until the demon cave is formed. Sun Jinren, you go first. Leave the others here with me to suppress it." The other 4 nodded in agreement, and after Sun Ji left, they formed hand seals together to perform the heavenly seal. Under the combined efforts of the 5 grotto heavens, the spiritual vigor that was surging in the spirit cave was suppressed in an instant. It stopped at the last moment and could not go any further. When Jinren Gai saw this, he knew something was wrong. He stretched out his finger and touched Su Yanzhong's forehead. Su Yanzhong suddenly felt emptiness in his body, as if he had fallen from a high place. His Dharmakaya suddenly trembled, and there were signs of it breaking. He could not help but fall forward and fall to the ground. Jinren Gai sighed, "What a pity. I didn't expect there to be 6 people from the Qinsang school. If there were only 3, you would definitely pass today." He shook his head again and rode on the light. He brought Ji and Su into the void and disappeared in a moment. Sun Jinren rode on the cloud. Not long after, he saw the 9 cloud towers. He waved his sleeves, and a gust of wind sent them all out. He took another step and crossed the void, traveling to the deepest part of the demon cave. Jinren Huan had been waiting for a long time. When he saw him, he stood up and bowed, Sun Jinren greets you. I have been rude and interfered in the affairs of the younger generation. I am ashamed to occupy this spirit cave. I am willing to give it to your sect. Sun Jinren sneered and said, if you are not willing, you can stay. I will fight with you. Jinren Huan said expressionlessly, Sun Jinren must be joking. You and I are not yet at the stage of the 3 heavenly trials. We should protect ourselves. Sun Ji sneered and said, you are not wrong. But if we miss today, there will be another day. Jinren Huan did not say anything else. He bowed and rode on the light, leaving with his disciples and the group of cultivators. Sun Jinren watched him leave. He then turned around and praised, Zhang Yan, you did well this time. What are your plans after you go back? Zhang Yan smiled and said, I will focus on cultivation. When I return to the sect, I will meet the sect master and resign from the position of the 10 first seats. Chapter 866. When Sun Jinren heard Zhang Yan's words, he nodded and said, it's all thanks to you that you were able to suppress 2 demon caves. You can enter the floating heavenly palace to cultivate. Among the 4 of us, only senior brother Meng had this kind of opportunity. You have to make good use of it. Zhang Yan agreed. He thought for a while and took out the rainbow splitting awl from his sleeve. He held it in his palm and said, I still have to thank Jinren for bestowing this treasure. I will return it to its rightful owner now. Sun Jinren waved his sleeve and pushed the awl back to him. He said, there's no need to return it. Just leave it with you. Zhang Yan nodded and kept it again. He said, I still have some matters to attend to. Sun Jinren, please wait for a moment. Sun Jinren said gently, this demon cave has already been sealed by the 5 Zenrens. There's no danger. You can go on your own. After you're done, you can come to Tianzhong to see us. Zhang Yan bowed and headed towards the original location of the Crouching Dragon Path. Without the disturbance of the spiritual tide, he moved extremely quickly and arrived at the front of the path in a flash. He then made a hand sign, wanting to summon the blood thread gold worm back. Not long after, a young man floated over from the sky. His face was pale and he looked like he had been drinking too much. His eyes were rolling around. When he saw Zhang Yan, he kowtowed and said, Greetings, master. Zhang Yan sized him up and said, if you want to transform with your original body, without the help of external forces, it would take at least 1,000 years. You got lucky today. The young man revealed a flattering expression and said, if it wasn't for master bestowing that mouthful of Junyang essence, I wouldn't have today's transformation. This time, he swallowed 8 Yuanying cultivators in one go and benefited greatly. He used this opportunity to transform and even got some benefits later on. However, seeing that there were still quite a number of devil sect cultivators in the dragon subduing path, and it wasn't something they could handle, they retreated unwillingly. Since you have transformed, you should also have a name. Zhang Yan thought carefully for a moment and said, how about I call you Zhang Chan? Zhang Chan was overjoyed when he got his name. He kowtowed and said, thank you, master, for giving me a name. Thank you, master, for bestowing this name upon me. Zhang Yan smiled, waved his sleeve, and ordered him to wait at the side. Then, he continued towards the place where the profound and demon clans were fighting just now. When he arrived at his destination, he took out a jade slip and rubbed it with his hand. Spiritual light and auspicious chi appeared on it. It spat out more than 3 feet and then shone down. It looked around as if it was looking for something. Zhang Chan came over and asked, what is master looking for? Do you need my help? Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head. Those insects of yours can't do that. He looked for a while. He seemed to have found his target. He reached out and grabbed a grayish-white round stone. It was the size of a human head, and there was a slight breathing sound. He looked at it. He couldn't help but think about what Du Shushuan said when he came. He kept it in his bag and waved his sleeves, flying upwards. Not long after, he came out of the devil cave. He saw the 6 perfected ones sitting cross-legged in the sky, so he went up to greet them. Perfected Zhu said, Zhang Yan, bring the disciples back to the sect first. Sun Jinren said, wait. There's no need to rush. Zhang Yan dealt a heavy blow to the devil sect. It's not appropriate for him to go back alone and protect the disciples. Without waiting for the others to speak, he turned around and said, lead the disciples far away first. After we suppress the devil cave, follow me back to the mountain. Since he had already said so, the others naturally wouldn't embarrass him over such a small matter. They all silently agreed. Zhang Yan bowed and used his escape technique. He turned into a rainbow and flew into the distance. When he was more than 10 miles away, he saw the 9 lofty cloud towers on the clouds. He waved his sleeves, slowing down the wind around him, and landed on one of them. When the Qinsang cultivators saw him, they all came up to greet him and called him Perfected Zhang. Although they didn't know what exactly happened in the Devil Cave, with the appearance of the 6 perfected ones, it could be said that the outcome was set. As the leader this time, Zhang Yan had made a great contribution. When he returned, he would definitely be able to enter the 3 high halls. Even if he became a grotto heaven, it was something that could be expected in the future. He couldn't just be treated as one of the top 10 disciples. Zhang Yan said, the 6 perfected ones are about to suppress the devil cave. We can't stay here for long. Follow me and leave quickly. At this moment, when Dou Hongping, Huang Songquan, Lu Xiangying, and the others saw the arrival of the Qinsang school grotto heaven, they quietly retreated. When he gave the order, no one objected. They put away the 9 lofty cloud towers and quickly left the mountain boundary. About 6 to 8 hours later, there was a sudden tremor behind them. It was continuous and dense. Everyone looked back and saw a huge ball of qi condensing in the distant sky. It circulated for thousands of miles, but they couldn't tell what was inside it. The clouds above seemed to have been cleansed, not a single strand was left. A clear stream shot up into the sky, smashing through layers of clouds, and no one knew how far it went. Everywhere that could be seen below, the mountains and valleys were all flattened, turning into a white land. Many of the disciples saw the power of the perfected ones for the first time. They were all shocked and amazed. Zhang Yan looked ahead, his eyes flashing. Previously, when he shot out the 9 Yuanfen pearls, they were easily blocked by perfected Huan. It was clear that even a cultivator of the 3rd degree of Yuanying like him was worlds apart compared to the perfected ones of the perfected ones. When he returned this time, he would put aside all worldly affairs and focus on cultivating, hoping to get a glimpse of the mysteries of this realm. Another hour passed. Beyond the horizon, a sea of qi and thunderclouds floated over. Faint sounds of thunder could be heard in the sky. As it passed above the crowd, Enlightened Sun's voice rang out from within the clouds. Disciples, guard your hearts and minds. Follow me back to the sect. As soon as he finished speaking, a wind and clouds rose and wrapped around the disciples, returning to the direction of the Qinsang school. Zhang Yan also followed the wind. After an unknown period of time, he felt his body slow down. He looked down and found that he was already in front of the clear nether heavenly lake. When he looked up again, he saw Sun Jinren standing not far in front of him. The others were nowhere to be seen. Sun Jinren chuckled and shook his sleeve, throwing out a glass box. He said, "This is the essence furnace elixir jade. Keep it well, it will be of great use in the future." Zhang Yan didn't refuse and accepted it. He bowed and said, "Thank you, perfected ones." Sun Jinren reminded him, "After you return to the sect, don't be in a hurry to go into seclusion. In a few days, the sect will discuss the rewards and someone will come to call you." Zhang Yan said, "Thank you, perfected ones." After saying a few more words, he bid farewell to Sun Jinren. After returning to the clear nether heavenly lake, he entered the cave abode. He summoned Lu Yenny and the other disciples. After some instructions, he entered the abode and sat down. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. In front of the cave abode, a Taoist boy came with a decree and said, "Perfected Zhang, sect leader has a decree to summon you to the main hall of the Sky Palace." Zhang Yan floated out of the abode and received the decree. Without any delay, he used the sword escape technique and headed straight for the floating sky palace. He flew without any problems, and not long later, he landed in front of the main hall of the palace. The Taoist boy outside saw him. He bowed and said, "Are you perfected, Zhang?" Sect leader said that if you come, there is no need to report. Just enter the hall to meet him. Zhang Yan nodded, tidied up his robe and walked in. After entering the hall, he raised his head and looked. He saw the sect leader holding a horsetail whisk and sitting on the high platform. The 11 venerables of the sect were also here, and they were divided into 2 rows. Apart from them, Elder Sun was also waiting at the side. When they saw him arrive, they all looked over. Zhang Yan glanced at them. However, he noticed a detail. Below the venerables, there seemed to be a few empty seats. He couldn't help but think. He walked down the stairs and bowed. Disciple Zhang Yan greets sect leader and venerables. Jinren Meng was the first to speak. Zhang Yan, I've called you here today to discuss the matter of merit and reward. Elder Sun made a name list a few days ago, and you are the head of this event. Take a look and see if there are any omissions. Elder Sun took out the golden book from his sleeves and held it up. It flew up from his hand and floated down. Zhang Yan took it and opened it. His gaze swept across the area, and he saw that not a single disciple of the Yutsang sect who had participated in the battle had been left out. Everyone had been rewarded. However, there were no casualties, so it was obvious that there were other arrangements. After looking through it, he handed it over with both hands. The name list here is very complete, I have no objections. Meng Zhen waved his hand and took the golden book over. He called a Taoist child over and instructed, hang this book in the merit courtyard. Tomorrow, the disciples of each cave abode can go and receive their rewards. The Taoist child took it, bowed and left the hall. At this moment, Elder Sun walked out and stood in the middle of the hall, asking for instructions. Arrangements have already been made for most of the people of our Deep Blue sect who died in battle this time, and they all have places to go. Only Han Wanka and Peng Yuzhou are not easy to make arrangements for. Sect Master, please tell us. Sect leader Qin said solemnly. The 2 of them sacrificed themselves to break the formation at the critical moment. They are the heroes of Qinsang School. If they have the talent to cultivate in their next lives, they can become direct disciples. Shen Baishuang said, senior apprentice brother Li still has disciples. If martial nephew Han has the opportunity in his next life, he can become my disciple. Venerable Peng also said, Peng Yuzhou was originally a member of the Peng family. After his spirit reincarnates, I can accept him as a disciple. I don't think it's too harsh. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, this way, everyone has their own place. The arrangement is appropriate. Elder Sun bowed and left. Sect leader Qin looked at His Highness and said, Zhang Yan, do you have anything else to say? Zhang Yan's thoughts changed. This time, the cultivators of Dongsheng that he had recruited were not listed in the name list. He believed that the sect would not take it seriously. However, he had his own arrangements. He was prepared to accept them into the Yaoyin sect. This would be an explanation to them. But there were a few people who had to be mentioned at this moment. They bowed and said, Shen Yinfeng of Guangyuan sect, Venerable Shen, helped our Qinsang school a lot this time. In addition, the demon cultivators of Yuyuan tribe protected our Qinsang disciples. Many of them died and were injured. Their contributions cannot go unnoticed. Sect leader Qin said slowly, our Qinsang school will not mistreat our fellow Taoists. The matter of Guangyuan sect has already been arranged. It is not the right time yet. As for the demon cultivators of Yuyuan tribe, although they were ordered to come, since they worked hard for our Qinsang school, we cannot mistreat them. Venerable Yen suggested, Teacher, why don't you give them a Qi path technique and an imperial seal as a sign of encouragement? Sect leader Qin did not agree or disagree. He only said, Zhang Yan, what do you think? Zhang Yan said, Yuyuan tribe came to our Qinsang school. Because of the curse, they are still quite obedient. But hundreds or thousands of years later, when the curse disappears, it will be difficult to restrain them. The act of bestowing merits may increase their ambition. In my opinion, why don't we allow them to send their disciples to cultivate in Yaoyin's sect? This way, they will be rewarded and they will still listen to our Qinsang school in the future. Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "This matter is up to you to decide." Zhang Yan bowed to show his gratitude. At this moment, the hall suddenly became quiet. Everyone had finished discussing their contributions. Next, it was time to discuss how to reward him. Chapter 867. Zhang Yan saw that no one was making a sound. He thought for a moment, then bowed and said, "Sect leader Reverend, disciple has a matter to report." Sect leader Qin's expression was amiable as he said, "Tell me now." Zhang Yan said, "From the north to the south, I met no less than 10 Devil's Doctrine disciples. I feel that my skills are not enough, so I would like to resign from my position as the top 10 disciples and focus on my cultivation. I hope sect leader will allow me to do so." Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "We will discuss this later. Let's talk about our achievements first." Sun Jinren heard this and stood up from his seat. He said loudly, "Master, if it wasn't for Zhang Yan who saw through the Devil's Doctrine scheme and ordered the disciples to split up, we would not have been able to suppress the 2 demonic caves. His contribution is so great that no one in the sect can match it. If we follow the previous example, it would be difficult to compensate for it. I am willing to ask for a reward on his behalf." Shen Baishuang said, "In this battle between our two sects, Zhang Yan, as the leader, has the merit of planning. As a disciple, he has suppressed the 2 demonic caves. According to his contribution, he should be given a golden pavilion, imparted with superior Xian Qi and given a Dharma weapon." Meng Zhen also bowed and said, "Master, the demonic calamity has lasted for thousands of years. To be able to suppress the 2 caves is already half of the Devil's Doctrine's fate. This gives the Qinsang school more room to maneuver in the future. It is indeed a great contribution. What Jinren Shen and junior apprentice brother Sun said makes sense." Sect leader Qin nodded and looked at Elder Chen, who was seated on the right. He said slowly, "Jinren Chen, as an elder in the sect, what do you think of this proposal?" Elder Chen hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for asking, sect leader. I think that it is our sect's fortune to have such a good disciple among the younger generation. In the future, she will definitely be a pillar of support for our sect. No matter how we reward him, it will not be too much." Zhang Yan's suppression of the 2 demonic caves was indeed a great achievement. No one could erase it. After Elder Chen said this, the perfected masters of the aristocratic families all agreed. However, Qin Yu frowned and said, "Zhang Yan is the head of the sect's 10 disciples and has made a great contribution. As the upper hall's side hall master, it is only right for him to be taught the sect's great Tao. Only the real treasure." She looked up at Sect Master Qin. Sect Master Qin, when senior apprentice brother Yen broke out of the sect all those years ago, he took many treasures with him. Now that the treasure pavilion is empty, what can we give him? Could it be that we are going to ask senior apprentice brother Yen for some? The moment she mentioned the words senior brother Yen. Among the 4 enlightened masters of the aristocratic family, apart from Elder Chen, who was still calm, the rest of them didn't look too good. However, what she said wasn't false. Back then, many of the sect's treasures were taken away by that person, and the rest were either in their hands, or the sect had other uses. It was impossible to use it as a reward. Sect leader Qin looked down and said, "Zhang Yan, what do you think?" Zhang Yan also knew that magic treasures at the level of true artifacts were already extremely rare. If a cultivator wanted to raise one, they would need to be lucky. At the very least, they would need more than 1,000 years of effort. In this battle of the Devil's Cave, don't look at how the disciples of both sects were given true artifacts. However, these sects all had long legacies and deep foundations, not something the other sects could compare to. The true artifacts that they carried were either taught by masters and disciples, or refined by generations. For example, Li Mountain Sect, a sect that had been established for less than 1,000 years, its sect master had spent a lot of effort to only refine one true artifact. For example, Tao Jinren, who founded Clear Feather Sect, only managed to suppress Jade Reef Sect, which had existed for 10,000 years before he could be considered a true artifact. Even what he had on him had a history, and none of them were made in these hundreds or thousands of years. Moreover, these kinds of treasures had a bad temper. Even if he took them, he might not take a liking to a Yuanying cultivator. Moreover, he had two treasures, the sun-embracing axe and the vitality pearl. In the short term, if he didn't enter the battle of the Xian demons, it would be enough to protect himself. After careful consideration, he said, I'm afraid I'll disappoint sect leader's kindness. With my cultivation, I'm afraid I won't be able to control such a true artifact. Sect leader Qin smiled and said, since you don't want a true artifact, then what kind of reward do you want? Before Zhang Yan could speak, Elder Qin said, how about this, Zhang Yan can enter the spirit cave to cultivate for 100 years. When he said that, everyone in the Grotto Heaven sect was stunned. The spirit cave of the Qinsang school was formed by the great power of the great underworld patriarch and the power of an entire continent. It wasn't something that the spirit caves of the other 7 sects could compare to. If one wanted to enter it to cultivate, they would need the permission of the sect leader. Shen Baishuang smiled coldly. This place was naturally a good place. Cultivating here would save him several times the effort compared to his peers of the same generation. Back then, Yan and Zhu were able to enter the Grotto Heaven within 100 years after the internal strife in the sect. Of course, it was because of their hard work. However, if it wasn't for the elixir jade contained in the spirit cave, they would have to wait at least 100 more years to achieve this. However, no matter how good this place was, Zhang Yan couldn't use it now. Because Qi Yuntian was studying the mysteries of the Grotto Heaven and had reached a crucial point. At this moment, he was in the spirit cave and no one knew when he would come out. In other words, this benefit could be seen but not touched. However, it was enough to reward him. This seemed to be an understatement, but Zhang Yan's path of success was delayed for at least 100 years. At that time, the disciples of aristocratic families like Du De and Huoxian would have a chance to catch up and not let him monopolize the limelight. Shen Baishuang glanced at Elder Chen. If it was him, sect leader's senior brother wouldn't accept this proposal. But now, it is very likely that he will give Elder Chen some face. Sect leader Qin thought for a while and said, let's do as Elder Chen says. Then, he looked down and said, Zhang Yan, come forward to receive the decree. Zhang Yan took a few steps forward and came close to the hall platform. Sect leader Qin said in a loud voice, Zhang Yan, in this Xian demon battle, you judged the situation and guarded 2 acupoints in a row. You have made great contributions. From today onwards, you are the side hall master of the Qinsang School's Duzhen Hall. You will be granted the Golden Pavilion to observe and enter the Spirit Cave to cultivate for 100 years. Following his words, the entire hall trembled and 3 beams of light shot down from above. They stopped in front of Zhang Yan and remained motionless. Zhang Yan glanced at them and saw a jade booklet, a seal, and a set of robes. They were all wrapped in auspicious spiritual flames and supported by auspicious clouds. He waved his sleeves and put them into his bag. Then, he bowed and said, Disciple thanks sect leader and all the perfected masters for their generosity. Sect leader Qin nodded slightly and said slowly, in the Golden Pavilion, there are books and writings left by the perfected masters. If you encounter anything you don't understand, you can ask me. Hearing this, Zhang Yan once again bowed to express his gratitude before retreating. At this time, Elder Sun held a jade booklet in his hand and stood up again. He bowed and said, Sect leader perfected master, since perfected Zhang is the side hall master of the Duzhen Hall, the position of the top 10 disciple cannot be left empty. I wonder about the matter of succession. Mengzhen raised his hand and bowed. He said, Master, perfected Master Shen's 3rd generation disciple, Xing Shangying, can replace this position. Xing Shangying was taken in by Zhao Gu from the Hanyuan school after he came to Donghua. Although he was his disciple in name, the techniques he learned were all given to him by Shen Baishuang. Now, he had cultivated to the middle of the core transformation realm. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "Sure. Fill in the name list first, and we will decide who is better during the competition." Elder Sun quickly picked up his brush and filled in his name on the jade booklet. Everyone present did not have any strange expressions. As a Grotto Heaven perfected master, there should be a disciple in the top 10 disciple. And every disciple had the support of a Grotto Heaven master behind them. For someone like Zhang Yan, who did not have a Grotto Heaven master, to be able to become a hall master of one of the 3 highest halls, 1 in 1,000. The Taoist child beside sect leader Qin said, "The discussion is over. Is there anything else, perfected masters?" At this moment, perfected master Yen shook his sleeves and stood up slowly. He walked into the hall and said, "Master, today, all the perfected masters are here. I hope Master can make a decision as soon as possible." Sect leader Qin looked at him and said, "Gongzhen, have you made up your mind?" Perfected Master Yen bowed and said, "This disciple knows that there is no hope for the path of Tao in this life. I am willing to start a family and spread the branches and leaves to protect the younger generation. I hope Master can fulfill my wish." Sect leader Qin waved his sleeves at him and said, "Go." Perfected Master Yen took a step to the side and walked to the row of aristocratic families. He bowed in front of the 4 perfected masters Chen, Du, Xiao, and Han. The 4 of them also stood up and bowed to him. He smiled and sat down at the bottom of the table. Zhang Yan was a little surprised. Just now, he understood the meaning of perfected Master Yan's words. He wanted to join the aristocratic families and establish the Yan clan in Qinsang School. However, Luo Qingyu's disciple, Zhang Shanghong, was still one of the top 10 disciples. It would take at least hundreds of years for the Yan clan's disciples to enter this game. He changed his mind. Based on the sect leader's past actions, this step was not so simple. It was very likely that it was another chess piece that he had set up. Sect leader Qin looked at Elder Chen who was sitting and said, "Elder Chen, is this appropriate?" Perfected Master Chen only said, "Perfected Master's arrangement is very good." Sect leader Qin said, "Perfected Master Chen, after the date is set, you can order someone to inform me." Perfected Master Chen bowed and said, "I dare not. I will inform the sect leader." Sect leader Qin nodded and stood up. He waved his horsetail whisk and went to the back of the hall. The Taoist child at the side knocked on the jade chime, and the long sound spread throughout the hall. The Taoist master in the hall stood up and said, "Farewell, perfected master." As soon as the sect leader left, the perfected masters also turned into rainbow lights and left. As a junior, Zhang Yan only came out of the hall after everyone had left. When he was outside, he looked around and saw that Shen Baishuang had not gone far. He walked up to him and bowed, "Perfected Master Shen, do you have something to tell me?" Shen Baishuang raised his hand and handed over a talisman. He said, "Only the elders of the 3 halls can enter the Golden Pavilion. According to the rules, it can only be opened once every 36 years. However, since you have made a great contribution and are the hall master of the side hall, you can be exempted from the rules. At the beginning of next month, you can enter with my talisman." Zhang Yan reached out and took it. He bowed and said, "Thank you, perfected master." Shen Baishuang said lightly, "Although the Golden Pavilion has the legacy of the senior, in terms of real benefits, it is not as good as the hall master of the 3 halls. You will know when you enter the Grotto Heaven state." Apart from the upper extreme hall, the Duzhen Hall and the Daylight Void Hall had always been succeeded by the top 10 disciples who had made great contributions. For example, Hu Xian was now the hall master of the side hall of the Daylight Void Hall. Although Shen Baishuang was the direct disciple of Zhui Yuming, he was not the hall master, so he could not sit on this position. Otherwise, with his status and cultivation, he would have been the hall master of the main hall long ago. After the 2 talked for a while outside the hall, Zhang Yan took the opportunity to ask, "I don't know about this." "Just now, perfected Master Yan, there is no need to hide this from you. You will know eventually. Shen Baishuang paused and looked in the direction of the daylight void hall. He said, Elder Chen is about to die. Chapter 868. Zhang Yan thought for a while. Elder Chen was a senior. Once he passed away, the structure of the sect would change. It was a big deal. He thought for a while and said, May I ask when Elder Chen will be reincarnated? Shen Baishuang said lightly, There are still a lot of things in the family that he needs to arrange. The later he leaves, the better. Even if it takes 100 or 200 years, it would not be a surprise. Should we urge him to leave earlier? Zhang Yan was amused when he heard this. Elder Chen had a good plan. He had released the news early to make it easier for his family to act. But after all, he was a person who was about to leave. During this period of time, even if he had any requests that were slightly excessive, the sect leader would not be too harsh on him. Shen Baishuang glanced at him and said, Qi Yuntian is still cultivating in the spirit cave. You can't enter yet. I'm afraid you will have to wait for a long time. But you don't have to worry too much. You have made a great contribution this time. I think the sect leader will have other arrangements. Moreover, there is more than one way to achieve cave heaven. The way of others may not be your way. If you insist on it, you will be at a disadvantage. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and raised his hand, Thank you for your guidance. Although he had not yet obtained the method of achieving cave heaven, but from Shin Chang's book, he vaguely felt that the method of achieving cave heaven seemed to vary from person to person. There was no fixed rule. The method that was suitable for others may not be suitable for oneself. And Shen Baishuang's words confirmed his previous thoughts. Qi Yuntian practiced one of the 5 techniques, the Xuanzi True Wonderful Upper Cave Technique, and later cultivated the Northern Dark True Water, which could be considered to be of the same lineage as the Great Underworld Grandmaster. Cultivating in the spirit cave created by the Great Underworld Grandmaster was the most compatible. And what he cultivated was the Taishian True Technique that was deduced by his own family. Even if entering the spirit cave could improve his cultivation, it may not be the best choice. Shen Baishuang said intentionally or unintentionally, Did you see the seats in the hall today? If you don't sit, there will be others. Zhang Yan's heart moved. Before he could say anything, Shen Baishuang had already flown away in a clear light and disappeared in the blink of an eye. He lowered his head and thought for a moment. His eyes could not help but flicker slightly. Hearing this, he could roughly deduce that the empty seats just now were left for the disciples who would enter the heavenly passage in the future. As far as he knew, regardless of the size of the East Flower Spirit Cave, there was a limit to the number of heavenly abodes that it could support. However, when he thought about it carefully, he realized that no matter how he thought about it, none of them could remember the exact number. With his cultivation, as long as he wanted to, he would be able to remember anything in his heart. This time, it was obviously obstructed by the Tao. But even so, he was roughly certain that it wouldn't exceed the number of fingers on one hand. That is to say, the spirit cave in Qinsang School could only support 16 Taoists of heavenly caves at most. Right now, there were already 11 people. Including the sect leader Reverend whose cultivation level was unknown, there were only 3 or 4 empty seats left. Zhang Yan took a few steps forward and looked down at the Great Dragon Lake. Among the younger generation, Qi Yuntian was the next sect master. Now that he was cultivating in the spirit cave, he would definitely be able to get one. There was one more person that couldn't be forgotten. Although that person in the little cold world was imprisoned, the sect obviously didn't have any intention to kill him. Maybe when the time came, he would be released. Then, assuming that this person would also occupy a seat for others to fight for. If there were more, it would be 2, if there were less, it would be 1. Thinking about it like that, no wonder Elder Chen did this just now. Looking at the current situation, compared to Huxian, Duda, and the others, he had the highest chance of forming his own heavenly passage. If he was alone, it would be okay. However, the disciples of the Zhaoyu bloodline were also amazing. This would definitely block the path of the younger generation of the aristocratic families. After Zhang Yan understood all of this, he smiled. He waved his sleeves and used his escape technique. He headed towards the Duzhen Hall. As he flew up, the seal on his body gave off a golden light that resonated with the hall below. Immediately, an invisible wind rose around him. He relaxed his body and let the wind send him over. Not long after, he arrived in front of the hall. There were already more than 10 Taoists waiting there. A beautiful Taoist nun walked out and bowed. Lu Ximei greets the hall master. The other Taoists also bowed respectfully. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Everyone, please rise." He knew that these were the elders of the Duzhen Hall. He looked up and saw that all of the Taoists here were above the second stage of Yuanying. 3 of them even had the same cultivation as him. They were already in the third stage of Yuanying. Although these elders weren't of the same lineage as the previous sect master, Qin Qinggang, they were all the disciples of the previous 12 spiritual abode masters. He looked to his right and saw that there were more than 10 Taoists bowing to him under a hall 1,000 feet away, but they didn't come over. Taoist Nun Lu explained, "Hall master, those are the elders cultivating in the right hall." The side hall of the Duzhen Hall was divided into the left and the right hall. The right hall was second and the left hall was the highest. According to the past rules, even if Zhang Yan earned enough merits to enter the hall, he could only be the master of the right hall. However, after Zhui Yuming ascended, there was no one in charge of the hall for a long time. In addition, he made a great contribution this time, so this time, Sect Master Qin directly gave him the master of the left hall. Taoist Nun Lu asked nervously, "Hall master just arrived, do you have any orders?" Although these elders were also people of the Duzhen Hall, strictly speaking, they were only elders on duty. Normally, they could only cultivate in the outer hall in the name of guarding. They couldn't enter the hall unless there was something important. As for whether they could cultivate here in the future, it would depend on whether the hall master, Zhang Yan, gave his permission. Because they didn't know what his temper was like, they were all a little nervous. Zhang Yan said with a smile, as usual. Hearing those words, everyone heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. Zhang Yan gently waved his sleeve and said, "I'll walk into the hall. Everyone, you can go back to your own places." Taoist Nun Lu and the others didn't dare to disobey. After bowing, they all left. Zhang Yan walked straight into the hall. The layout of the front hall was ordinary, so he only took a few glances and soon reached the back hall. After walking 100 steps, he turned around a stone screen and saw a tall stone cave in front of him. The 3 words, Xuanzi Path, were written on it. There was a row of wide stone steps that could allow 10 people to walk side by side. At the end, there was a flash of spiritual light and a majestic spiritual energy surged out and floated down. There were restrictions here. If others came here, they would be suppressed and had to follow the rules and go up step by step. But as the hall master, he didn't have to do that. With a tap of his foot, he got up and flew up. After a dozen breaths, his eyes lit up and he was out of the cave. Looking up, he saw the vast sea and sky. The clouds were like a waterfall, surging up and down, and the sound of tides. It was unusually majestic. Looking into the distance, he could see 3 huge islands floating on the sea. They were shrouded by a celestial cloud, and the temples and pavilions were faintly discernible in the mist. He breathed in and out and found that the spiritual opportunity here was much more abundant than the clear nether heavenly lake. But after scanning a few more times, he thought to himself, so this is a small world. But this place seemed to be boundless, different from other small worlds. Its origin was probably not that simple. Just as he was about to fly to the island peak, he suddenly saw waves in the sea. It was a demonic flood dragon that was over 100 feet long. When it came close, it said respectfully, "Are you the left hall master?" "I'm little demon Tai Jia. I'm here to welcome you." As it spoke, its huge body came ashore. It lowered its head and revealed a saddle bridge on its back. "Hall master, please come up." Zhang Yan nodded and stepped forward. When he stood on the saddle bridge, the demon dragon roared and soared into the sky. dozens of demon dragons emerged from the waves, stirring up the wind and clouds. They accompanied by the side, scaring many of the spiritual beasts in the sea and causing them to flee in panic. Zhang Yan said faintly, "Why do you have to muster such a large force?" Tai Jia turned and said, "Hall Master, please don't blame me. 1,000 miles to the east, there are thousands of demon dragons living. They formed a country on the sea. Although they don't have any supernatural powers, they are tall and strong. They often feed on us, the demon dragons, so we have to travel together." As it spoke, a cold snort came from beside it. "They eat you, don't tell me you won't eat them back." Tai Jia felt that the voice was slightly familiar, and when he turned to look, he saw a young military general with long eyebrows standing at the side and looking at him with a displeased expression. Tai Jia couldn't help but tremble and stuttered, "Hu Hua Jinren Bao Yang." Zhang Yan was surprised and smiled, "Jinren knows them?" The young general snorted and said, "Years ago, the old master received guidance from Grandmaster Tai Ming. After his cultivation was successful, he came to the Qinsang school to express his gratitude. But he couldn't find him, so he left 100 demon dragons for the disciples of the Qinsang school to control. It's these disappointing fools in front of us." His words were filled with disappointment. Tai Jia felt wronged, but it didn't dare to refute, so it could only fly away. In less than a moment, Tai Jia arrived in front of a cliff palace and said, "Jinren, there are celestial masters' prohibitions in front of us, I can't go any further." Zhang Yan got down from the dragon's back and walked on the cloud. After 10 breaths, he turned around a rock and landed in front of the cliff palace. There were 2 Taoists standing there. They were Luo Qingyu and Zhuang Bufan, who were now the elders of the Hall of Duzhen. When they saw him, they went up to him and greeted, "Greetings, Hall Master." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said politely, "There's no need to be so courteous." He turned his gaze and saw a red-crowned crane in the sky not far away. On it sat a little girl who was about half a foot tall. Her round eyes were wide open as she bowed to him. She also said, "Servant Shin greets Master." Zhang Yan looked carefully. This little girl didn't have the slightest bit of an animal's aura. She wasn't a magical treasure or a real spirit, nor was she a plant spirit. She was undoubtedly a human. It was just that she looked so petite. It wasn't because of magic, but because she was born like this. Luo Qingyu smiled, "Servant Shin is from Jing. I was brought here from the outer world by our founding master to serve as a servant. After tens of thousands of years, there are more than 10 million of them. They are divided into 3 continents and 10 countries in the Xuanzi realm. Although there are not many of them who can cultivate, they are all intelligent. If Hall Master needs anything, you can send them to you." Servant Shin replied with a clear voice, "Hall Master, if Master has any orders, you can just order me around." Zhang Yan said, "I have just taken charge of the Hall of Duzhen and I am not familiar with it yet. Bring me around." Servant Shin was delighted and said, "Hall Master, please follow me." Luo Qingyu bowed and said, "If that's the case, Junior Marshal Brother Zhuang and I will take our leave. We have found a cave on the sea to cultivate. If Hall Master needs anything, just summon us with a talisman." Chapter 869. P.S. There was a problem with the backstage. How many times did I toss and turn last night? I couldn't upload it in the morning. Now I can finally upload it. Zhang Yan followed Shen Nu around the hall and had a general understanding of the situation. Just the territory under the left hall had 3 flying peaks and floating islands. On it, there were 8 pagodas and 9 temples as well as hundreds of palaces. In fact, if one were to look into it, this place was just for him to stay. This huge sea region and all the continents were under the control of him as the Hall Master. Shen Nu pointed at a huge tower that reached the clouds and said, "Master, this is the highest place of the 3 peaks. It is called the Tide Observing Pavilion and it is also where the central prohibition of the hall is located. If Master wants to, after refining it, you can move the island peak to any place in the sea realm under your jurisdiction." Zhang Yan's heart moved. Listening to this, it seemed like there was more than one sea realm. He looked at the tower in the clouds and raised his hand, "I can go up alone." you can go back first. Shen Nu bowed and said, if master has any instructions, you can call my name anytime. Zhang Yan nodded his head. Then, he channeled his mana and transformed into a rainbow. He flew along the ridge of the mountain straight to the top of the mountain. The tower didn't look far, but with his speed, it took him more than 10 breaths to get there. He landed in front of the tower and the golden seal on his body flashed. The tower opened immediately and the golden rings and jade chains on both sides slowly retracted. The stone door rumbled as it descended. He walked in with his sleeves behind his back and looked around. The tower was supported by more than 10 coiled dragon pillars. The jade board under his feet was full of intricate carvings of unknown birds, beasts, insects, and fishes. In the middle, there was a platform with jade steps circling on both sides. It was shaped like a dragon's spine. Behind it, there was a thick stone screen. From the looks of it, it was a jade plate with 2 fishes hugging each other. He walked up to the platform and stood still. With a flick of his finger, the jade plate turned and separated, revealing a map. In an instant, he felt like he was standing at the top of the sky and looking down. In front of him, fog and clouds floated by, and in his ears, he could hear the sound of the rushing sea. Hundreds and thousands of islands flashed past his eyes. This was the world map of the Xuanze realm. However, it was much larger than he had imagined. There were more than 10 ocean realms, and they were all connected by a whirlpool. Beneath his feet was one of the 3 largest sea realms. According to the map, there was a whirlpool 3,000 miles to the west. It was the path to the sea realm under the rule of the right palace. Just now, the main hall was located in the sea of clouds above his head. Even though there were no restrictions blocking it, the astral winds and sand here were no different from the outside world. He couldn't go there for the time being. Seeing this, he could not help but sigh in his heart. Among the small worlds he had been to, the Yaoyin clan was the largest, and the entire sect was within it. However, compared to this place, the difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. Although he didn't know what the Day Sky Hall and the Upper Extreme Hall looked like, it shouldn't be too far off. As for the great underworld ancestral master who was able to open up these 3 lesser realms on his own. What level had his Tao, arts, and divine arts reached? It could be said that as long as the floating heavenly palace and the 3 upper halls existed, the foundation of the Qinsang school wouldn't be bad. After looking back and forth a few more times, he realized that although most of the mountains and rivers in the map were famous, there were still some places that only had pictures of mountains without any annotations. Looking closely, the handwriting of these mountains and rivers were different. However, they were all from different people. He instantly understood that these places were probably nameless before, and these were recorded by the previous hall master when he was searching this area. Thinking about this, his interest was instantly piqued. Those who were able to become hall masters of the Duzhen Hall were all in the 3 levels of Yuanying realm. At this time, they needed to find a way to form a grotto heaven, but they were still walking around here. Moreover, it wasn't just one, but all of them were doing so. That meant that there was something useful for them here. If they had the time, they might as well walk around a few rounds. After a long time, he waved his sleeve, and the map fluctuated and dissipated like a breeze. Behind it was a jade white stone tablet, which was where the restriction array was located. In fact, because the Xuanze realm was in the floating heavenly palace, there were countless restrictions outside. Even the people of the Grotto Heaven realm couldn't enter without permission, so it didn't matter if this restriction wasn't refined or not. When Zhui Yuming was hall master of the left hall, he didn't care about this, and he didn't even step into the tide observing pavilion. However, Zhang Yan was a cautious person, and he didn't want to be disturbed while he was cultivating. Even if there was a 1 in a million chance, it wouldn't be appropriate. Therefore, after knowing that there was a restriction, he came here as soon as possible. He took 2 steps forward, raised his hand, and poured a huge amount of magic power into it. Gradually, a bright light appeared under his palm, but the light was extremely soft, like ripples. After an hour, he refined the restriction array, and from then on, he could come and go as he pleased in this sea realm. At this time, he floated up 30 feet, and arrived at the second floor of the tower. This was a cultivation abode, and there was still light smoke coming from the incense burner, and a strange fragrance assailed his nostrils. He came to a table, picked up a scroll, and found that it was a travel biography. After flipping through it, he found that the words were humorous, and the words were humorous. It was obvious that this person didn't care about trifles, but the name at the bottom caught his attention. He Jinghuan. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He also knew this spiritual master, who was one of the 12 Grotto Heaven spiritual masters of the previous generation, and in terms of seniority, he was even higher than the previous sect master. However, he didn't know what happened back then, and he left his body in the earthly fire heavenly furnace, and no one in the sect seemed to know. He put down the travelogue and walked to the bookshelf at the side. He took out another scroll. Unsurprisingly, this was also written by this Shinran. Although the information recorded in it was quite valuable, it did not involve any secret matters. Between the lines, there was a sense of high-spirited and vigorous spirit. He nodded his head, and this was written by this spiritual master when he just became the left hall master, and there was hope for the Grotto Heaven. At that time, it was still the time when the fourth sect master was still in power, and the Qinsang school had yet to be in chaos. Who knew how many talents were gathered in the school, and He Jinghuan was able to stand out from many of her peers, so she must have been very outstanding. After flipping through the books, he didn't find anything useful, so he quietly used his mana, and the prohibition moved. In the blink of an eye, he entered a pill room that no one had used before, and then sat down cross-legged, and went into meditation. In a flash, 2 days passed. He calculated the time, and it was already the beginning of the month. He picked up the jade mallet in front of the table, and knocked on the jade chime in front of him, and said, "Where is Shen Nu?" Not long after, the array door opened, and a little girl came out. Wan Fu said, "Master, what orders do you have?" Zhang Yan said, "I'm going to the Golden Pavilion to read books these few days, so I won't be in the hall. However, the prohibition has been activated, remember to restrain the people, and don't wander around." Shen Nu said, "I'll remember." She lowered her head and thought for a while, and asked, "Master, do you have any animals or spirits that you want to tame?" Zhang Yan smiled and asked, "So what if I do?" "So what if I don't have any?" Shen Nu said, "When the previous hall masters went out, they would bring back many spiritual objects to increase the vitality of this realm. If Master wants to tame monsters, you can designate a piece of land, and order the Han tribe to dig up rocks and move mountains, and pile up soil to form land. There's no need for Master to control them, I'll bring my people to take care of them." In the Xuanzi Sea realm, because of the vast area, there were no living creatures, so it needed to be filled up by the outside world. However, those who could go to the Duzhen Hall were at least the top 10 disciples, and those who had the hope of ascending to the Grotto Heaven. After arriving here, most of them only focused on cultivation, and there were very few who really cared about it. Therefore, in the past 10,000 years, the ones who reproduced the most here were the living creatures that the great underworld patriarch brought from the outside world. Zhang Yan thought for a while, if he could successfully ascend to the Grotto Heaven, he would be able to control the Duzhen Hall for at least 1,000 years, and at that time, he could try to leave some good things for the younger generation. It was too early to think about this, but he suddenly thought of something, and asked, "Who was the one who first told me about this?" Shen Nu seemed to be at a loss for a moment, and said, "I don't know, but there seemed to be someone who told me about it." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered, and he thought for a while, and said, "Wait for me to come back, then we'll talk." Then, he turned the formation, and the scene in front of him changed. He was already in front of the Xuanzi path of the Duzhen Hall. He stepped on the astral wind and leaped out of the hall. Lu Xinmei and the other elders were cultivating in the hut outside the hall, and when they saw him coming out, they quickly stood up and greeted him. Zhang Yan only nodded, and flew straight to a hall above the sky palace that looked like it was made of gold and jade. Not long after, his body shook, and he knew that he had entered the formation. Shen Baishuang's voice sounded in his ears, "The formation here was set by the previous Shinran, even with the talisman, it's difficult to pass through. Don't move, I'll cast a spell to bring you in. Zhang Yan obeyed and didn't move. He allowed the mana to wrap around his body and pull him in. In a flash, he arrived at a cave that wasn't very big. In front of him was a stone bridge, and there was a stream flowing under it. The sound of the stream made one's mind relaxed. After crossing the stone bridge, it was a stone path that was spiraling upwards, and it was shaped like a snake. He tried to use his mana, and realized that he couldn't fly, so he walked up step by step. He walked for an hour, and just now, he stopped in front of a cave. He tidied up his robe, and pushed the door in, and saw that the layout was similar to the Jingluo courtyard. The four walls were filled with stone niches, and there were jade scrolls and books inside. There was a stone altar in the middle, and Shen Baishuang sat cross-legged on it. There was a lamp in front of him, and it was just enough to light up the surrounding area. Zhang Yan cupped his hands, and said, Jinren Shen. Shen Baishuang said, there are no rules here, but there are techniques left by the previous generations to create their own grotto heaven, you can go take a look. Zhang Yan bowed to him, and walked to the place. He took out a jade scroll from one of the niches, and flipped it open. Before he could read it in detail, a spiritual light shot into his forehead, and his body couldn't help but tremble, but after a moment, his eyes regained clarity. Shen Baishuang nodded. These jade scrolls also had spirituality, and there were many insights of the previous generation's Shinren Dongtian. If the cultivation level of the person reading the book was enough, he could receive the spiritual seal, and it was like the person who recorded the book giving personal guidance. If one couldn't bear it, he could only read it with his eyes, and it was hard to understand the true meaning, and it was much worse than the former. At this moment, Zhang Yan felt that there were many techniques in his mind, and they were complicated and huge. He sorted them out one by one, and after reading it, he couldn't help but fall into deep thought. After a long time, he shook his head, and put the jade scroll back. He walked to the next place, and picked up another scroll. Similarly, a spiritual light entered the center of his brows, and this time, he seemed to have found the right path, and he was extremely engrossed in it. Chapter 870. Not only did the Taoist books left behind by the seniors of Qinsang School, there were also secret books that were collected over the past 10,000 years. Zhang Yan spent 2 days and just now he had finished reading the Taoist books. However, after he put the jade scroll back, he shook his head slightly. Shen Baishuang looked over and asked, "How is it?" Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Forgive me for being direct, but the technique here is a little rough. It's not a top-notch technique." Shen Baishuang smiled and said, "You are right on point. The techniques that we use to form a grotto heaven can be divided into top, middle, and bottom 3. Just now, what you are looking at is the technique of borrowing objects. If you look closely, it can only be considered as a bottom technique." Zhang Yan nodded his head and was not surprised at all. The so-called method of borrowing objects was to take an object that was filled with spiritual vigor and merge its original spirit with oneself. From there, one could use it to ascend to a grotto heaven. Although there were many types of this technique, those who were able to complete it were mostly on the path of borrowing objects and spirits. The so-called borrowing objects was the merging of the cultivator's body with the true spirit of the true weapon. If one ignored the harsh conditions, as long as one knew the trick, in theory, any cultivator who reached the 3rd level of Yuanying could do it. However, it was easier said than done. It was definitely not as simple as it seemed. Cultivators first had to find a true spirit that was willing to merge with them. Although once it was done, the true spirit could be freed from its shackles and reincarnate as a human, and no longer be trapped in a cage and be manipulated by others, there was a huge risk involved. Most true spirits would rather maintain their old state than do such a thing. For example, the true weapon of Chongyue True Temple, the Yin-killing blade, was the result of an elder of the sect failing to merge with it. In the end, he ended up half-crippled. That elder also died because of that. Most people were stopped before they could even take this step. As for the method of borrowing objects, it was similar to borrowing objects. However, the object was not a magical weapon, but a different kind of living being. Jiuling sect's Hibiko Higashi incarnated into Taihao School's Mount Qingzuan to steal the Ganoderma ancestor's body shell. Another example was the one from the southern cliff continent who refined the king candle worm. Daoist Nameless, who was killed by Lingya, was one of them. However, because the spiritual vigor did not come from oneself, it was borrowed from an external tool, it was difficult to improve in the future. According to the records, only one person was able to ascend to heaven, but this was only a legend. No one had ever seen it with their own eyes, so it was ranked last among all the techniques. However, this did not mean that these cultivators' battle prowess was weak. If someone could borrow a true killing artifact and use it together, it would be enough for them to look down on their peers. Shen Baishuang continued, this technique originated from an unorthodox sect. Most of those who take this path are not fated with the great Tao. I think you are not willing to take this path either. He pointed upwards and said, all the techniques are over there. You can take a look again. Zhang Yan bowed and walked up the stairs to the second floor of the Golden Pavilion. He saw a cave on the east side. There were also many Tao books, but the number was less than half of the lower technique. He walked closer and looked around. He saw a red silk jade scroll hanging at an eye-catching spot. He took it down and his eyes lit up. This was left behind by a grotto heaven Jinren named Yi Sanshan. He was one of the 12 grotto heavens of the previous generation. He was a master and a disciple. This person was kind and loved to take care of the younger generation. When he was in charge of the Golden Pavilion, he thought about how difficult it was for the disciples who could not use the heart transmission spiritual seal technique to view the technique. He was afraid that they would make mistakes, so he carefully organized the techniques and left this scroll for convenience. Zhang Yan did not look down on this technique just because it was described in words. Instead, he read on patiently. The middle technique was a technique to store qi. There were only 3 techniques recorded here. The first was to absorb the pure and turbid spiritual qi of heaven and earth to train the body and use it to open the door. During the 18-piece sex sword battle, the Gantian Jun-Yang essence that the sex fought for was the pure qi of heaven and earth. As for the turbid qi, it was the spiritual vigor that was condensed in the mountains and rivers after the heaven and earth was created. Any cultivator in the world, be it the Xian men or the demon sects, as long as they had the opportunity to obtain enough qi of heaven and earth, along with rare external medicine, they would have the opportunity to break through the door-opening state. However, the difficulty was that these 2 qi were extremely difficult to find. The Jun-Yang essence originally came from beyond the heavens. It had strong and dry qi, so it needed to be refined by the star stone before it could be used by the cultivator. Naturally, it was not impossible for the person who obtained the grotto heaven to go above the heavens to collect it. However, after he came back, he would need to refine the impurities in it repeatedly. It would not take long to do this for tens to hundreds of years. Not to mention that it was a waste of time and effort, in the end, the harvest would be less than 1%. Therefore, very few people would do this. As for the turbid qi, it was even harder to obtain. Other than using it to break through the realm, it could also be used to refine treasures and medicine. Therefore, since ancient times, it had been used by the cultivators. If one really wanted to use it, it could only be obtained by refining a large number of earth-ean spiritual medicine. In the Zhou family's secret method, the white moon heroic fruit was obtained this way. However, it was good to use it to refine a Dharmakaya, but if it was used to break through the realm of the grotto heaven, the medicinal efficacy was far from enough. Zhang Yan pondered and said, although the ancient book said that the earth-ean turbid qi has been eliminated, this may not be true. Otherwise, the various sects would not value the Jun-Yang essence so much. The sects must still have some in their hands. He continued to read. The second method recorded in the book was the method of borrowing the primordial qi of the previous ascended cultivators. Before the ascended cultivator broke through the realm, he would leave a strand of primordial qi in his body. If the disciple of the later generation came from the same sect and had the same origin, after obtaining this qi, with the help of the precious medicine in the sect, they could also enter the grotto heaven. This kind of method could only be achieved by the sects that had been established for a long time and had a deep foundation. And because the aristocratic families were born with the bloodline, they had an advantage on this path, and most of them relied on this method to achieve success. Zhang Yan had studied the Billowing Cloud's secret book before, and he could not help but think, rumor has it that Sun Jinren once obtained this Dao technique in the mountains, so he might have obtained this strand of qi that day as well. The third method recorded in the Jade Scroll was the most mysterious, and it depended on a strand of luck that was related to the cultivator. When a cultivator walked on this path, he had to place his mind on one thing, and then use all kinds of methods to achieve the goal. During this process, he had to go through all kinds of hardships and training, and the more difficult it was, the higher his achievements would be in the future. For example, when Tao Xinren founded the Clear Feather sect, he walked on this path. Before this, he established several sects in the East Flower continent, but they were all destroyed by the Southern Flower sect. In the end, he established his sect on the East Sea, and he used this to enter the Grotto Heaven. Others like Bailey Qingyin, Yang Poyu, and the others also walked on this path. If they could keep the Xianmen out when fighting for the Devil's Cave, they would naturally enter this realm. They could be considered to have obtained the middle method. As for people like Su Yanzhong, who only dared to steal qi from the outside to climb the Spirit Cave, even if they succeeded, they would only have obtained the lower method. These three methods did not have a strict boundary between them. How to do it depended on one's own choice. For tens of thousands of years, there was no lack of talented and outstanding people who pursued the Great Tao, and cultivated the three paths at the same time. When Zhang Yan saw this, his heart moved, and he suddenly thought of the Duzhen Temple. Shen Nu once talked about the matter of gathering living beings. If his guess was right, this should be a method left behind by the ancestors, and if it could allow the billions of living beings in the Xuanzi Sea to multiply, when it was done, it could also become the Grotto Heaven. In less than an hour, he finished reading the Jade Scroll. However, he did not disregard the rest of the Tao books, and still picked them up to read. After 2 days, he came down from the second floor of the Golden Pavilion, and walked in front of Shen Baishuang. He bowed and said, "Disciple has already read the middle method, may I ask Reverend, where can I find the best method?" Shen Baishuang looked at him. He said solemnly, "There are no records in the Golden Pavilion of the upper method, but this method is rarely used since ancient times. If you don't follow this path, it will instead hinder your cultivation. Do you really want to read it?" Zhang Yan smiled, and said, "I haven't read it, how would I know if it's not what I want?" Shen Baishuang agreed, and raised his hand. A golden talisman flew out, and entered the space between his eyebrows. He said solemnly, "This is a secret of my Qinsang school, without permission, it is not allowed to be privately taught to disciples." Zhang Yan nodded his head solemnly, and then found a praying mat, and sat down to refine it. Not long later, he refined the talisman, and the incantation appeared in his consciousness, but when he looked at it, he was shocked. It was not that this method was too profound, but too simple. Other than the notes and the insights of the predecessors, the true incantation was only a few hundred words. After looking at it carefully, he couldn't help but frown. After thinking for a while, he asked, "May I ask, Jinren, what method did you use to achieve the Grotto Heaven?" Shen Baishuang said, "This is not a secret, there's no harm in telling you." He paused for a while. "Among our generation, only my senior brother and I followed the upper method." Zhang Yan asked again, "Among the Jinren who have ascended in the past, how many people have cultivated this method?" Shen Baishuang thought for a while, and said, "Including my master, there should be 4. Zhang Yan couldn't help but think. The so-called upper method was not profound, it was to examine oneself, strengthen one's Taoist heart, and search for the fated chance to break through the realm. No one knew where this chance came from, and it couldn't be described in words, but the moment the cultivator reached that point, his heart would sense it, and he would naturally know what to do. Moreover, at the last step, the cultivator would need to absorb a large amount of spiritual qi of heaven and earth at the juncture of breaking through the realm, so he had to find a place with abundant spiritual vigor. Such a place was hard to sustain even in a grotto heaven, only a spiritual cave could withstand it. This meant that only the direct descendants of a sect would be able to benefit from this. At this moment, he understood that Qi Yuntian was able to cultivate in the spiritual cave at this time. He was almost at this step. There were actually 4 Zenrins in Qinsang school who cultivated this method and ascended. It was obvious that this was not only the upper method, but also the proper method. However, he was not willing to choose this method, not because he was afraid of the difficulty, but because the cultivators usually waited for the fated chance for hundreds of years, usually 700 to 800 years old, or even before the end of their lives. Only then they could truly grasp this mystery. Now, he was only 300 years old. That was to say, if he chose this path, he would need to cultivate in peace for another 400 to 500 years. If it was during normal times, he could still afford to wait, but there would be 3 great trials in 1,000 years. Even some Jinren in a grotto heaven might not be able to protect themselves, let alone a Yuanian cultivator like him. The only way was to seize every opportunity and become a grotto heaven before that, then there would be hope for him to survive the trials. However, if he did not choose this path, would he really choose the middle method? He pondered for a long time, and suddenly raised his head, and asked, Jinren, may I ask, other than these 3 methods, is there any other way? Shen Baishuang pondered for a while, then slowly replied, there is another method. I've heard my master mention it, but I don't know the details. If you want to know, you can ask the headmaster. Chapter 871. Zhang Yan only wanted to try his luck by asking about the method, but he did not expect that there was another method to seek Tao, and it sounded like it was not simple at all. He thanked Shen Baishuang solemnly and asked a few more questions before he left. Just as he stepped out of the door, he heard a rumble behind him. When he turned around, the entire golden pavilion had disappeared without a trace. Every time a disciple came in and out of the golden pavilion, it would disappear on its own. If he wanted to come again, he would have to wait until the beginning of the next month. If it was not for his great contribution to the sect and the permission from Shen Baishuang, he could only enter once every 16 years. Zhang Yan secretly speculated that other than the method to create a paradise, there might be some secret techniques to ascend. This was not something he could look at now. He took a few glances outside and was about to head towards the floating celestial palace when he heard the sound of waves in the sky. A young cultivator holding a talisman came over while stepping on clouds and mystical water. He stood in the sky and bowed, asking loudly, is that Palace Master Zhang? Zhang Yan looked over and nodded, yes, it is I. What business do you have with me, my fellow disciple? The cultivator hurriedly bowed and said, I'm a disciple on duty in the Jingde Grotto Heaven sect. I'm here on Venerable Meng's decree to invite Palace Master Zhang over. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He did not know why Meng Zhen was looking for him. However, this Tao master was the first disciple of the sect master. Since he was summoned, he had to go. Thus, he raised his hand and said, then I'll have to trouble you to lead the way. Although he had been to the Jingde paradise once, he was brought there by Meng Zhen using his arcane energy. He did not know the way himself. The young cultivator replied that he did not dare to. He then raised his hand and waved the talisman. A wave of water gushed out from within, and the amount of water increased until it covered the entire jade platform. In the end, it slowly rose up, forming a jade waterfall that was 10 feet wide. The sound was loud and clear, and the qi was like that of a dragon. The man pointed and said, Hall Master Zhang, follow this waterfall and you will arrive in front of enlightened master. Zhang Yan nodded. He took a step forward. When he reached the head of the tide, the waves slowly surged and carried him in. After crossing the waterfall, there was a bright light in front of him. He was already in a heaven-suspending pavilion. Meng Zhen was sitting in the pavilion, surrounded by clouds and mist, with exotic pines leaning against each other. Beside him sat a young man with rosy lips and white teeth. It was his junior brother, Sun Jinren. Zhang Yan did not expect the two of them to be here. He was slightly surprised, but after thinking for a while, he vaguely guessed the other party's intention. He took a few steps forward and saluted, greetings to the two spiritual masters. Meng Zhen raised his hand and pressed it down, then said in a relaxed tone, Zhang Yan, you are now the Duzhen Palace's side hall master, and today we are not in the main hall, so there is no need to stand on ceremony, sit down and talk. Zhang Yan smiled and did not decline. He cupped his fists, waved his sleeves and sat down at the side. Sun Jinren asked with a smile, Zhang Yan, you have been in the Golden Pavilion for a few days, so you must have found the method to break through? Zhang Yan replied, the methods left behind by the predecessors are vast and profound, there are many kinds of methods. Disciple only skimmed through them in a hurry, but I dare not say that I have mastered them. Meng Zhen said, even though there are thousands of methods, there are high and low ones. Have you chosen which method to use? Zhang Yan said, I have not found the method to my liking. Meng Zhen nodded and said, since that is the case, I have a method that is also the orthodox method, I wonder if you would like to hear it? Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, I do not dare, please enlighten me. Meng Zhen said in a deep voice, you have seen the methods in the Golden Pavilion, so you should know that there is a method called borrowing qi. Don't look at the number of people who use this method now, but in ancient times, many people used this method to enter the grotto heaven, often borrowing the heavenly stars to absorb the heavenly yang essence, and also burying the pill jade to absorb the earthly yin essence. Sun Jinren snorted and continued, however, the heavenly yang is infinite, and the earthly yin is limited. At that time, there were a few capable people who deduced that in less than a few thousand years, the earth essence qi in the land of the 9 continents would be cut off. Therefore, after a discussion, they worked together to create a small world and hid almost 100 famous mountains and rivers in advance to store the spiritual opportunity of the earth. Among these people, there were the founding masters of the 3 sects, Qinsang, Shaoqing, and Yuxiao. As a disciple of my Qinsang school, you can enter this place. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, when I came back from the sword battle of the 18 sects, although I obtained a lot of Jun Yang essence, I have used up a lot of it. Even if the earthly yin essence can be obtained from this place, I am afraid it is not enough to peep into the grotto heaven. Sun Jinren chuckled and waved his sleeves, you do not have to worry about this. You are in charge of a hall in the floating heavenly palace, and you have made great contributions in the past. If you really want to achieve this, the school will make up for the shortfall. Of course, if you are not willing, you can also leave this opportunity to your disciples. My Qinsang school can take it, it is better than letting other sects take it. Meng Zhongren said in a serious tone, with your talent, after thousands of years, you will become the pillar of my Qinsang. No matter what method you use to achieve the grotto heaven in the future, I hope that you will be able to live in harmony with your fellow disciples and protect the school. My Qinsang school has been in internal strife for hundreds of years, causing great damage to our vitality. Now that we have recovered, we cannot afford another one. When Zhang Yan heard this, he understood that the 2 spiritual masters had called him here today, it was because of the matter of Qi Yuntian occupying the spirit cave. Whether it was intentional or not, in reality, it was slightly blocking his path. Now that he was in charge of the side hall of the Duzhen Hall, other than Qi Yuntian, there was no one who could compete with him in terms of cultivation. As long as he followed the prescribed order, in the future, he would definitely be able to enter the grotto heaven and become the master of the main hall. Meng Zhen did not want the 2 of them to have discord in the future, so he deliberately tried to do him a favor. Although he had not yet achieved the grotto heaven, he could use this as an excuse to go to the small world to collect qi. In this way, even if he did not use it himself, he could still leave it for his disciples. He bowed and said, thank you for your guidance, spiritual masters. Sun Jinren warned, that door to enter the realm, you need to rely on a magical weapon. This treasure was snatched by that person during the internal strife hundreds of years ago. Although the head later refined another one, that person's disciple could take the opportunity to enter, so if you really want to go, you need to be careful, don't be careless. Meng Zhen looked at him up and down and said, before achieving the grotto heaven, you need to perfect your body first. Although your mana is outstanding among your peers, but it has not been long since you entered the 3rd realm, you still need to be patient. I hope that you will not be anxious and impatient. Zhang Yan nodded and said seriously, I will remember. At this time, Sun Jinren asked, when you came here, where did you want to go? Zhang Yan replied, before I came here, I wanted to pay a visit to the spiritual master. Sun Jinren laughed and said, it is the two of us who have delayed you. All right, I will send you back. After saying this, he shook his sleeve and a cloud of mist rose from the surroundings and surged towards him. Zhang Yan was pushed by the cloud and he could not help but fly out. In an instant, he felt like he had passed through thousands of hills. When he stood still and looked up again, he saw that he was already in front of the floating heavenly palace's side hall. He smiled and stood at the same spot for a moment. He tidied up his robe and strode forward. He said to the deacon boy in front of the hall, can I trouble you to send a message that Zhang Yan from the palace of Du Zhen is here to see the sect master? The Taoist boy knew that the person in front of him was the new person in charge of the palace of Du Zhen, so he did not dare to delay and said, Palace Master Zhang, please wait for a moment, I will go and report it now. The Taoist boy turned around and walked quickly. After a while, he came out and said, Palace Master Zhang, please enter. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and walked slowly into the inner hall. He saw the heavenly water rolling and the torrent was vast and mighty. There were ripples of light that looked like a galaxy. Below, the sect master was holding a horsetail whisk and sitting on a jade platform. Zhang Yan came up and bowed, disciple Zhang Yan greets the sect master. The sect master said amiably, you have come to my place because you have encountered something that you do not understand? Zhang Yan bowed and said, these few days disciple has been reading all kinds of techniques in the Golden Pavilion and have gained some understanding. But after thinking about it, there seems to be nothing suitable for disciple. Thanks to Jinren Shin's guidance, I have come to the sect master to seek advice. Sect master Qin smiled and said, I have a path here that is suitable for you. Zhang Yan bowed and said, please enlighten me, sect master. Sect master Qin waved his horsetail whisk and the heavenly river flowed backward. Behind him, the land of the 9 states appeared. Another 6 boundaries rose up one by one, and there seemed to be ferocious beasts lying dormant in them. He said, when the Timing founding master established the sect, he had sealed 6 great ancient beasts. Apart from the 10,000-year-old azure dragon, which had been killed due to its supernatural power, the other 5 beasts were not dealt a heavy blow. After 10,000 years, the seals have loosened. If you can imbue your mind with the technique, you can eliminate all of them and stop them from coming into the world. Then, you can use this opportunity to achieve success. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. These were all ancient beasts. Even if they had been trapped for 10,000 years, they were not something a normal Yuanian cultivator could deal with. But after thinking about it carefully, he had an idea. Others might not be able to do it, but it did not mean that he couldn't. Among the 5 beasts, the Jasper heavenly centipede had already been eliminated by him. Then, there were 4 left. If there were no accidents, after being trapped for 10,000 years, they would not have time to recover. At most, they would only have the cultivation level of Yuanying. And he had the Bao Yang and Pearl of Vitality in his hands. He also owed 2 favors to Tao Jinren. If he really did it, there was a possibility that he could succeed. But no matter how good the technique was, it was only a medium technique. Since he'd stepped onto the Tao, he'd always sought superior techniques, and it was only because of this that he possessed a cultivation that far surpassed his peers. But if he fell a step behind on this Tao, then the advantages he'd accumulated earlier would be wasted, and it would be no different than starting all over again. This was absolutely not the right method. But he had the intention to search for these 6 beasts. Now that he had perfected his strength path, after obtaining the remains of these beasts, he might be able to rush to the 5th transformation state. He thought for a while and looked up. He raised his hand and bowed. Jinren Shin once said that he heard his master, Elder Zhua, mention that there was a technique that was not within the 3 techniques. Only Jinren Shin knows about it. May I ask for guidance on this technique? When Jinren Qin heard it, he seemed to be slightly surprised. But he did not speak. He stroked his beard and did not speak. After thinking for a long time, he then slowly said, among the 3 techniques, the best technique is the most difficult. To really be able to reach this step, there might not even be 1 out of 10 people. And the technique that you are asking for is even more difficult. If we really want to compare which is better, then we should call it the ultimate technique. Since you are the one who asked, it is also your fate, I can tell you about it. Chapter 872. When Zhang Yan heard that this technique was actually above the other 3, his heart trembled slightly. He held his breath and waited for the next part. Sect leader Qin continued, this technique requires the cultivator to understand himself and understand the relationship between heaven and man. Once obtained, heaven and man will resonate with each other and harmonize with each other. Then the spirit will come out and see the truth, the wind and clouds will blow. This is the so-called heavenly phenomenon. When he said this, the hall was suddenly filled with thunder. Zhang Yan could hear every word reverberating in his ears. When the sound subsided, he seemed to have understood something in the silence. However, when he tried to search for it, he couldn't find any clue. It was like looking at each other through a veil. It was blurry and hard to discern the true meaning. Sect leader Qin said slowly, just now, this is not my words. It was the patriarch's guidance and I said it through my mouth. Zhang Yan thought for a long time and couldn't help but feel emotional. He said, this is no longer a technique, but something close to the Tao. Seeking a technique is seeking the Tao. The path of the great Tao is indescribable and difficult to describe. I believe there are no techniques that have been passed down. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, for you to understand this, maybe there is some fate. I will also give you a word. Walking on this path, you should know what Tao you are seeking. If you can find it, then it will be successful. Zhang Yan looked up and asked, may I ask sect leader, in the land of the 9 continents, how many ancestors have achieved this technique? Sect leader Qin said in a deep voice, let's not talk about the random cultivators. In the land of the 9 continents, only my Qinsang, Shaoqing, Yuxiao, and Minghuan have been passed down for tens of thousands of years. However, I have never heard of anyone who achieved this technique. As for the ancient Vedanta, I don't know. Now that I think about it, the patriarch probably left this technique to let the younger generation know that the great Tao is endless and have a heart of reverence. It might not let people really walk this path. Zhang Yan couldn't help but be surprised when he heard that no one had accomplished it. However, he thought about it again. Even though this technique sounds illusory, there's definitely a reason why the Grand Master of the Great Underworld Ancestral Master passed it down in such a serious manner. He pondered deeply for a moment before he said, just now, disciple was enlightened, and this Tao might be compatible with disciple. Sect leader Qin looked over. His expression turned solemn. He said, this technique requires one to be courageous and diligent, to be consistent and to have a firm heart. There was no turning back. In other words, once you set foot on this path, you won't be able to change it. You better think it through. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. His magic power and divine abilities were all over the place. There were very few people in the same generation who could compare to him. However, his path had never been peaceful, and when had it not been dangerous? If he had kept cowering and retreating, he wouldn't have made it to where he was today. It would have been fine if he didn't know about this technique, but now that he had such a superior technique, why would he care about other techniques? Without any hesitation, he said loudly, I'm not afraid of danger. I've already decided to try this Tao. Sect leader Qin nodded. Then, he raised his sleeve and took out a jade slip. Back then, I also wanted to take a look at this Tao. Unfortunately, external matters disturbed my heart and it was difficult for me to take it. Now that I've looked back, I've gained some insights. Since you're interested in this Tao, take it and take a look. With a flick of his sleeve, a ray of light flew down. Zhang Yan took it and looked at it. He placed it in his sleeve and bowed solemnly. Thank you, perfected sect leader, for your help. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, anyone who can speak will tell you. If there's nothing else, you can leave. Zhang Yan bowed and said, I'll take my leave. He took a few steps back, turned around, and strode out of the hall. Sect leader Qin watched him leave and waved his horsetail whisk. He sighed and said, "Let's see how your fate is. If your Tao heart is firm, you might be able to pass this stage." After Zhang Yan arrived outside, he did not return to the Duzhen Hall. Instead, he flew towards the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake. When he flew past the sky above the Dragon Abyss Lake, he happened to fly above the Pill Tripod Academy. He thought that he had not greeted Zhou Chengju after returning to the sect, so he found a way in. When he passed by the inner hall, he glanced and saw a Taoist with a white beard and a straight back sitting inside. His long beard was neatly trimmed, and there were 2 children beside him. They looked very intelligent, but from their clothes and aura, they were not disciples of the Qinsang school. The Pill Tripod Academy was different from others. There were often many cultivators from sects who came to ask for pills. Therefore, he only took a casual glance and went in. The Taoist was calm at first, but when he saw Zhang Yan go in, he was surprised at first. Then, he seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed. He suddenly stood up, grabbed the arm of a child, and turned into a light to escape. However, it was an important place of the Qinsang school after all, so he did not dare to fly too high. After flying close to the ground for a while, he went outside. Seeing that no one was chasing after him, he could not help but wipe the cold sweat on his head and said, "It's okay, it's okay." A child beside him was a little puzzled and said, "Master, why did you run when you saw that Taoist?" The Taoist sighed and said, "That person is someone we can't afford to offend. If we're slow, I'm afraid we'll lose a layer of skin." "Forget it, although I haven't taken enough advantage of him these few days, I've found out a little about that matter. I can go back and have an explanation. Let's go back to the sect now." At this moment, Zhang Yan was in front of the fish boat. After a little sensing, he did not sense Zhou Chengju's aura, so he asked, "Is Master here?" After a while, a child came out, looked up, and hurriedly bowed. "So it's Xinren Zhang. The headmaster has been refining pills in seclusion these few days. I'm afraid it will take a few more months before he succeeds." Zhang Yan was a little surprised. After he came back a few days ago, although he did not personally come here, he had written to Zhou Chengju. Zhou Chengju said that there was nothing going on recently, so why did he suddenly go into seclusion? Zhang Yan asked, "Is there something in the sect?" The child shook his head and said, "There's nothing in the sect, but the day before yesterday, an elder Wu from the Pingde sect came. I heard that he is a relative of Xinren Qin's mother. After he arrived at the sect, he came to the headmaster to ask for pills. Because they are old acquaintances, the headmaster did not give him face and refined a furnace of pills for him. But this person was very impolite. Asking for a furnace of pills was not enough, and he came again and again. He either said that the disciples lack pills for cultivation, or he had a disciple who was seriously injured and the headmaster couldn't chase him away, so he went into seclusion to refine pills." Zhang Yan's heart changed, but he felt that this matter was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. After a little sensing, he could no longer find the Taoist's aura. It was obvious that he was gone. After thinking for a while, he threw out a token and said, "Just now, this person has left. If he comes again, find someone to report to me, and I will handle this matter." The child received it in a fluster and said, "If he comes again, I will definitely report to Xinren Qin." Zhang Yan got up and went out of Danding Courtyard. He went all the way back to Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake and entered the main hall. He summoned Jing Yu and asked, "Has the remuneration for the Taoists from Dongxing continent been arranged?" Jing Yu said, "Everything has been arranged. It's just that Taoist Master Wei said that she will return to Donghua in a few days. Before she leaves, she wants to see my teacher." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Go and invite her to see me." Jing Yu accepted the order and left. After about the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, Taoist Nun Wei entered the hall. She bowed and said, "Greetings, Taoist Zhang." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and invited her to take a seat. Seeing that one of her arms was still empty, he asked, "Why didn't Taoist Wei reattach her arm? If this goes on for a long time, it will hinder the path of Tao. Taoist Nun Wei didn't care and said, that day, it was eaten clean by the demonic insects and can't be found. My Taoist body is damaged, but I can't peek into ascending to Tao. That will naturally be my senior brother. I have cultivated until Yuanying, which is also the end. If I lose it, then so be it. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, you always contribute to my Qinsang school, but it's not good to see Taoist Wei go back like this. My teacher has a few spirit medicines that can regrow severed limbs. Why don't Taoist Wei stay for a few more days, and I can find them for you? Taoist Nun Wei hurriedly thanked him. Since there was a way to regrow severed limbs, she naturally wouldn't refuse. Zhang Yan smiled and said, just now when I came back, I heard that Taoist Wei was looking for me. What's the matter? Taoist Nun Wei said, that day when I came to Donghua, I saw that Taoist Peng Yuan's Taoist technique seemed to be somewhat similar to my Shaotsang realm. After thinking about it, I felt that it was hard to say if there was a connection. Since I'm here, I wanted to pay a visit. However, I'm originally a visitor from another continent. If I go rashly, you might suspect that I have ulterior motives. I heard that Taoist Wei has a disciple cultivating in this school. I wonder if you can introduce me to him. Zhang Yan pondered for a while. Although this matter seemed small, it involved two orthodoxies. If he was unlucky, it was very likely that something bad would happen, so he had to treat it cautiously. Thus, he said, later, I will write a letter. Taoist Wei can take it to find my disciple. After thinking for a while, he picked up his brush and wrote a letter, handing it to her. After Taoist Nun Wei thanked him, she excused herself. Seeing that there was nothing else, Zhang Yan returned to the inner house. When he sat on the couch, he took out the jade scroll given by the sect leader. He channeled his mana into it, and there was a flash of spiritual light. Lines of words floated in front of him. What was written on it was mostly about the various taboos and things that needed to be taken into account before cultivating the ultimate technique. However, the handwriting did not come from the same person. He secretly thought that other than the sect leader, there should be other people's insights. It might even be the previous sect leaders. After looking at it a few more times, there was one part that caught his attention. The general meaning was that if the path of the ultimate technique had already been walked by someone before, they would occupy this path and block those behind. Even if one's talent surpassed anyone in history, one would not be able to enter again. Zhang Yan smiled. How would he know the path taken by someone before him? This kind of unsure thing, if he took it to heart, it would only add to his worries. There was no need to pay too much attention to it. After looking at the Jade Scroll, he thought to himself, according to the Jade Scroll, after the few almighty people created the small world, there were still some things left behind for those who are fated. I have to go look for them, and at the same time, I can collect some of the earth-yin qi. Even if I don't use it myself, my disciples can use it in the future. This matter should be done sooner rather than later. Right now, in order to deal with the three calamities, all the sects were doing their best to nurture their disciples. If he was late, it might be taken away by someone else. As for the matter of seeking the Tao, he had no clue. Thus, he decided that after dealing with this matter, he would first clean up the remaining few ferocious beasts and see if he could use this to push his understanding spirit to the next level. After thinking about it, he said, "Call Yenny to my place." The mirror of the small pot beside him flashed, and a ray of light flew out. Not long after, Lu Yenny entered the cave abode and curtsied, "Disciple greets master." Zhang Yan said gently, "In a few days, master will travel outside to search for opportunities to break through the realm. When I'm not here, you will take care of the cave abode." Lu Yenny looked at him and said, "Master, disciple is willing to serve you." Chapter 873. Zhang Yan sat in the clear nether heavenly lake for half a month, taking care of all the matters that had accumulated after the battle of the Devil's Cave. Feeling that there was nothing else for him to do, he was ready to set off for the small world. However, going there required the use of a talisman from the sect. This item was currently stored in the merit courtyard of the 9 courtyards. Since he had already made an agreement with Meng Zhen, there was no need for him to pay a visit personally. He only found a disciple and ordered him to deliver his letter. After that, he quietly waited in the cave abode for a reply. After about an hour, a strange feeling suddenly appeared in his heart. He opened his eyes and lifted his sleeves to brush the small mirror. Immediately, a bright light flashed on top of it. The hazy smoke on it dissipated, revealing the scene outside the mountain. And at this moment, there was a spiritual light flashing in the sky. It seemed to be flying from a very far place. As it neared, in an instant, a gust of wind swept through the clouds. Within a radius of a few hundred miles, all the clouds were actually tumbling. Zhang Yan's gaze focused. He immediately determined that to be able to cause such a commotion, the person who came must be the enlightened master of the heavenly abode. However, from the scene, there was no hostility. It was most likely that he was here to pay a visit, but he didn't know which sect's enlightened master was here. At this moment, a whirlpool collapsed in the clouds. From inside, a six-armed divine general wearing a helmet and armor appeared. He held a whip and held a joint. He was 1,000 feet tall, and his body was surging with colorful qi. Dozens of spiritual treasures and golden weapons surrounded him, and jade necklaces hung from his body. There was an object that was completely white like jade. It had camel eyes and ox ears. It looked like an elephant, but not an elephant, like a boar, but not an animal. The air was filled with the sound of bells ringing and pearls falling. The divine general arrived in front of the great dragon abyss swamp and didn't proceed any further. Instead, he shook his body and released a boundless amount of clear qi. Then, he turned around and withdrew all of it, revealing a handsome Taoist with a full forehead and a green beard. He cupped his hands in the direction of the Qinsang school and said, "Fellow Taoists of Qinsang, Ping City's Wu Wei is here to visit." Not long after, he saw Meng Zhen personally coming out to welcome him. After the two of them exchanged greetings, no one knew what they said outside the door. Then, he flew to outer space. Zhang Yan thought to himself that it must not be a small matter for such a person to come to Qinsang school in person. However, the Dongtian in the sect would worry about it, so there was no need for him to ask about it. After thinking for a while, he calmed down and concentrated. He entered a meditative state. An hour later, the Taoist and Meng Zhen walked out of the Purple Light Courtyard's guest hall together. The Taoist raised his hand and cupped it, saying, "Meng Zhen, the devil tribulation hasn't ended, but the earth tribulation has arrived. In order to put an end to this disaster, I have no choice but to seek help from your esteemed sect. Please forgive me for my lack of manners." Meng Zhen said, "As fellow cultivators of the Xianmen sect, if your sect is in trouble, Qinsang will not stand idly by. I will report this matter to sect leader Reverend later." The Taoist bowed. He said, "In that case, I thank you on behalf of my sect. Farewell." Meng Zhen also raised his hand and bowed, saying, "Forgive me for not sending you off." The Taoist leaped and turned into clouds and wind, flying away. In an instant, he broke through the high clouds, causing the heavens to tremble for a while. The remaining force slowly dissipated. After Meng Zhen watched him leave, he walked back to the main hall and entered the inner room. He saw Sun Jinren already waiting there. The latter said, "Senior brother, what is Wu Wei doing here?" Meng Zhen pressed his hand down and gestured for him to sit down. He also sat on the main seat in the hall and said, "It's because of the previous matter. He wants us to agree to open a small world and let him in to collect the Yin essence of the earth." Sun Jinren sneered. He said, "The Pingda sect is so thick-skinned. That small world was originally shared by our 3 sections. Why did we give it to them for no reason? Moreover, the Dharma treasure in our sect has long been taken away by that person. Although it has been refined, only one person can enter. If he occupies it, who knows when he will come out? When that time comes, what will happen to our disciples?" Meng Zhen said in a low voice, "It's a little different this time. The Yuxiao school has already relented. I heard that a disciple from Mount Li has borrowed a treasure to enter the small world. Wu Wei is here because he is afraid that he will act in private and anger the Qinsong. He is here to greet us. Sun Jinren was stunned. He frowned and said, what does the Yuxiao school mean by this? If they set an example, wouldn't they be benefiting others for nothing? Moreover, the essence of the earth is limited. Even if they take out all of it, the calamity will still come. It can't be stopped. Meng Zhen stroked his beard and said, previously, Venerable Lingye sent a disciple to deliver a letter to the sect master. One of the words in it makes sense. What did this Daoren say? Meng Zhen said, there are still many people from the heavenly abode among the sections. Now that the calamity has just started, they can still try to stop it. However, if it really comes to a point where there is no way out, there is no guarantee that it won't have the idea of attacking the 9 continents Earth route. Even if there is no sign of it now, it will definitely lead to a great disaster in the future. Sun Jinren smiled and said disapprovingly, the 9 continents Earth route is the source of the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth. If it is not someone with great mana, don't even think about touching it. With your mana, what can you do? Meng Zhen said seriously, junior apprentice brother, don't be careless. There are many secret treasures in this world that can steal the spiritual vigor from the earth root. Once it causes any unexpected disaster, it is not something that can be reversed by human power. It is very likely that the same mistake as the West continent will repeat. Sun Jinren's expression changed slightly. Meng Zhen said again, my teacher has already said that when the 3 calamities occur, everyone will be in the calamity. Even people of my generation, don't think about staying out of it. Sun Jinren said loudly, even so, we can't let them take it. Didn't Zhang Yan just now write a letter to go to the small world? Ask him to hurry up and take as much of this essence as he can. Meng Zhen thought for a moment and said to the boy beside him, go and call Zhang Yan here. The boy bowed and went out to carry out the order. After a while, a sword gleam flashed outside the hall and landed in front of the steps. The boy entered and reported, Hall Master Zhang has arrived. Meng Zhen nodded and said, invite him in. The boy immediately passed on the message. Not long after, Zhang Yan arrived in the hall. He cupped his hands and bowed to the 2 people on the seats and said, esteemed masters, Zhang Yan greets you. Meng Zhen pointed at a praying mat in front of him and said, sit down and talk. After Zhang Yan thanked him, he came up and sat down. Sun Jinren said, just now, you are in the cave abode. Did you see the strange phenomenon in the sky? Zhang Yan nodded and said, I wonder which sect the esteemed master is here. Sun Jinren sneered, that is Ping City Cult's Wu Daoren. He is here to ask me, Qinsong, to open the small world and collect the earth-en essence to nourish the spirit vein and stabilize the spirit cave. When Zhang Yan heard this, a few thoughts flashed through his mind. He then looked up and said, is this esteemed master doing this because the earth trial of the 3 heavenly trials has arrived? Meng Zhen sighed and said, exactly. The devil trial started almost 300 years ago. I thought it would take more than 100 years before the earth trial starts. I didn't expect the first signs to appear. The spiritual vigor of a continent was like the ebb and flow of the tide. When the turbid qi flourished, the pure qi would decline. Even if 2 of the demonic caves were destroyed, it would not stop this trend. In this trial, even if the demonic sects did not move, they could still watch as Xianmen declined. The spirit cave of the 3 major sects was formed by the qi of the other continents, so they could be detached from the outside world. However, the other 7 sects relied on the spiritual vigor of Donghua continent, so this change would naturally affect them. Yuanyang, Taihao, Nanhua, and the other sects might be able to support the situation in the beginning, but the Pingda sect was small and weak. In addition, the demonic sects were watching from the side. If anything went wrong, they might be in danger of being overturned. Perhaps after thousands of years, the situation would be reversed under the operation of the heavenly secrets. However, the defeated sects would not have the chance to prosper again. Zhang Yan thought to himself, it's no wonder that the Pingda sect's heavenly abode personally came to ask for help. This matter involves the survival of the sect, so there's no need to care about face. However, the sects must have a plan to deal with the Earth trial. Since they came here in such a hurry, it seems like they just found out about this. Thinking about this, he became suspicious and asked, could it be that all the sects have heard about the inside story of this small world? Meng Zhen shook his head and said, after thousands of years, there are very few people who know about this small world. The three sects will not take the initiative to talk about it. However, the Netherworld Spring sect has been passed down for thousands of years, so they might know a thing or two. Perhaps they deliberately leaked the news to cause discord among the Xianmen. Jinren's son said, since 1,000 years ago, Shaoqing has absorbed the essence of his own family, and no longer interferes with the matters of this world. Originally, if Yu Xiao and I could speak as one, we would not be afraid even if the news was leaked. At least we could temporarily suppress this storm, and it would not be too late to open the door after the disciples have taken the pure qi of the small world. However, Yu Xiao has agreed to this matter first, so you need to go in and make a trip, in case you work for others. Zhang Yan said in a clear voice, I am willing to go. Meng Zhen took out a scroll from his sleeve and waved it. It slowly unfolded in the air, taking up half of the hall. Just now it stopped, and one could see the clouds and the mountains inside. It was obviously another world. He instructed, Zhang Yan, because the real treasure to enter this world was taken by that person, this item was refined later on. However, it is still not as good as the original item. Right now, I can only send you here. This world is vast, surrounded by the ocean on the outside and mountains on the inside. It is a situation where the sky is round and the earth is square. There are many demons and monsters inside. With your cultivation, you have nothing to fear, but I am worried that the commotion this time will attract that person's disciple. You must remember not to be careless. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I will remember. Sun Jinren flicked his hand and threw a jade bottle to him. He reminded, this is the Yen Zhu bottle, it can absorb essence qi. You don't have to be polite, feel free to take it. You are originally a first-grade gold core. If you really use the method of borrowing qi to create a cave, the essence you use will definitely be many times more than your peers. Even so, no one can say anything about it. Zhang Yan took the jade bottle and put it away. He bowed and said, I will go now. After he finished speaking, he took a step into the scroll. His body felt light and he found himself standing in the blue sky. The mountains below were undulating and the clouds were misty. In the distance, there were a few red-crowned cranes flying in the sky. He took a quick look and found that the spiritual qi in this place was not much weaker than the Great Lake of Dragon Lake. In the past, a few powerful people moved almost 100 spiritual mountains and beautiful rivers from the 9 continents. However, this world was very vast, almost the size of a continent. Moreover, the earthine essence was hidden deep inside, so it was not easy to find it in a short period of time. However, he was not in a hurry. He could take this opportunity to polish his cultivation and look for the opportunity to enter the slope state. Looking at a direction, he leaped and turned into a shocking rainbow that swept across the sky. Chapter 874. After Zhang Yan entered the small world, 10,000 miles away, there were 2 female cultivators traveling on a flower raft in the clouds. These 2 were disciples of Li Mountain sect. This time, they borrowed Yu Xiao School's talisman to enter the small world to search for the earthine qi. The one standing in front was a girl in her 20s. She had a beautiful face and an elegant bearing. The other girl was dressed in green. Her face was young and her hair was combed into a double spiral bun. She looked 18 or 19. At this moment, the slightly older girl looked at the mountains below and said, I didn't expect the small world to be so big. If we continue to search like this, who knows when we will find spiritual energy. The girl in green said, Senior Sister Chu, Yu Xiao School gave me half a year. Do you think we won't be able to find it? Senior Sister Chu shook her head and said, the earthine qi is hidden deep in the earth. With our mana, we can only detect the qi near the surface. If we go deeper, we won't be able to find it. When the time comes, we can only change to another boundary. The girl in green pouted and said, then let's search a few more places. It's not like we don't try our best. Master won't blame us. Senior sister Chu sighed and said, we can only do that. Previously when she came to this place, the seniors in the sect had warned her to be extra careful. For Jade Firmament sect to open their doors so easily, there might be some inside story behind it. Hence, she felt that this trip would not be smooth sailing. After another day, the two still did not find anything. Senior sister Chu said, it's not appropriate to continue searching like this. Why don't we ask the natives here and see if we can get anything out of them? Previously, they were wandering in the wilderness. Along the way, they saw a few villages and temples, but most of them were abandoned. They did not see any traces of people. The girl in green counted with her fingers and said, the southeast direction is densely populated. We can try there. After the two made a decision, they flew southeast. After traveling for 2,000 to 3,000 miles, they were out of the mountain boundary. The terrain in front of them gradually became flat. They could see rivers and occasionally a few villages. Several hundred leagues later, he saw a large road below. The road was lined with elm and willow trees. He could hear the chirping of insects and the singing of cicadas. Although it was dusk, there were still many travelers coming and going. Every few li, there would be a large pavilion to rest the horses and carriages. At the end of the road, there was a city with a white river flowing out of the city, on both sides of the beach. Lanterns have been hung up in each of the pavilions, reflecting the light and the water, looking like stars in the sky. One look and you can tell that this is a bustling place. Arriving at this place, the two women were afraid to shock the world, so they put away the flower raft and found a bamboo forest to settle down. Then, he walked out. However, as soon as they reached the outer room, the two women frowned at the same time and cast a small spell to conceal the smell of cows and horses. Only then did they walk toward a tidy pavilion. In the pavilion, the old man raised his head and saw two women walking over. Both of them were beautiful, and there was not a speck of dirt on them. She didn't look like a woman from the mortal world, so she couldn't help but be bewildered. She suddenly thought of the rumors about immortals and deities, and her heart skipped a beat. He instructed the manservant beside him and hurriedly walked out. His mouth opened, but he didn't know how to address them. After hesitating for a moment, he said with a face full of smiles, "Honored guests, may I know where you are from?" The green-clothed woman didn't answer and asked instead, "What kind of place is this?" The old man replied respectfully, "Go further along this road, and it is under the jurisdiction of Anzhou City. If the two of you are looking for a place to stay, there are two restaurants in the city, Peaceful Repose House and Sleeping Moon House. They are both clean places, specially used to receive honored guests." The green-clothed woman asked again, "Do you know if there are any famous mountains and rivers here?" The old man chuckled, "Are the two honored guests asking about places to go to sightsee? If you want to talk about historical sites, it would be the Vast View Pagoda outside of Anzhou City. It has been around for over 200 years since the previous dynasty. If you want to talk about exquisite and beautiful places, there is the Lotus Pond under the Twin Fish Bridge in the Liu family's mansion in the city. If you want to climb high and see far, you can go to the Spring River Terrace by the Heart Pot Water." Senior apprentice sister Chu heard this and felt that she wouldn't be able to find out anything by asking like this. She changed her mind and interrupted, "Old man, are there any strange stories here?" "Strange stories or strange stories?" The old man was startled, then nodded his head repeatedly, "Yes, there are. 30 miles south of the city, there is a big banyan tree. Its crown is so big that it can cover 1,000 people. Rumor has it that it has been 7,000 years since it planted its roots. Its branches and leaves are still lush and green like new. There have never been any insects or ants biting it. Visitors who pray for rain and divination are very accurate. Normally, there is an endless supply of incense. It is also a good place to go." Senior apprentice sister Chu's eyes lit up and she transmitted her voice, "After growing in this place filled with spiritual vigor for thousands of years, even if this tree doesn't become a spirit monster, it will still have spirituality. This is a local native, there is no harm in asking him. Perhaps we can find out some information. The green-clothed girl also agreed. The two of them thanked Daoran in the pavilion, then turned around and disappeared without a trace. The old man saw that the two of them suddenly disappeared and suddenly shivered. He looked left and right but couldn't find any trace of them. He couldn't help but stomp his feet and said, "Ai, the two immortal ladies left really quickly. Just now, I forgot to ask for the two immortal pills." The two of them left the pavilion and flew through the clouds with all their might. They covered a distance of 10 miles in a short while. From afar, they could see a big tree on the ground. Its crown was half a mile wide. Its branches and leaves were intertwined and full of vitality. From afar, it looked like a flying dragon or snake. In the eyes of the two of them, the big trunk was full of spiritual vigor. It was obvious that it had already transformed. The green-clothed girl was surprised. Such a vigorous spiritual vigor, why wasn't it struck by the heavenly lightning? Senior apprentice sister Chu said, "Junior apprentice sister, have you forgotten that this is a small world? Although this person is trapped and unable to transcend, he has avoided the tribulation of lightning, fire, and fire." The green-clothed girl nodded and said, "That should be the case." The two of them circled around the tree for a while. As if sensing that someone had arrived, the old tree's branches shook and a white smoke rose. It turned into a white-clothed scholar in the sky. He bowed to the two of them and said, "I wonder which immortal master has come." "I, Rong, greet you." Senior apprentice sister Chu saw that his cultivation was deep and had actually reached Jindan. It was obvious that he had been taught by the righteous path. She felt a little strange and bowed. She said, "My sister and I were originally cultivating overseas. We came here to visit a friend and passed by this place. We heard that there is a strange tree here that can call the wind and summon the rain. It will grant any request, so we came here to take a look." The scholar smiled and said, "That is just a rumor among the people. I, Rong, received guidance from an immortal master in the past. I can only borrow a little of the water chi, but I don't dare to show off in front of you two immortal masters." Senior apprentice sister Chu couldn't help but frown. She had already guessed that there were cultivators in this small world, but now it seemed that they were much more brilliant than she had imagined. She had a bad feeling in her heart. After pondering for a while, she said, "The two of us are wandering cultivators from overseas. This is our first time here, so there are many things that we don't understand." The scholar cupped his hands and said, "My cultivation is still shallow. Because of the limitations of this body, I can't travel outside, so I don't know much. If the two of you want to inquire about cultivation, go 3,000 miles east. There is a place called Black Smoke Mountain. The Qing Shao Temple is also a cultivator. The two of you might as well go there and ask." The two women heard his intention to decline, so they didn't force him. They asked for the general shape of Black Smoke Mountain, thanked him, and soared into the sky. Senior apprentice sister Chu wanted to travel through the night, but the woman in green grabbed her and said, "Senior apprentice sister Chu, it is 2,000 to 3,000 miles to get there. It will be late by the time we get there. Why don't we go to Anzhou City for the night? Maybe we can find out something." Senior apprentice sister Chu knew what she was thinking. They had been brought to the mountains to cultivate since they were young, so they rarely went out to play in the mortal world. However, the Donghua continent was now in chaos and war, so it was not as peaceful as it was now. Thinking that it would be inappropriate to visit at night, she agreed and said, "That's fine. We have traveled for days, and our mana has been depleted. Let's rest in the city tonight and go to Qing Shao Temple tomorrow morning." Yuxiao School, Moving Star Palace. 3 Taoists sat in the hall, discussing Dharma and Tao. The person sitting in the main seat was Wu Fenggu, who had interacted with Zhang Yan before. To his left was Zhou Qiao, a disciple of the Zhou family who had been on a diplomatic mission to Shaoqing. The last person was a young Taoist with delicate features. At this moment, a water mirror in the hall suddenly rippled, and with a flash of light, a golden arrow flew out and shot towards the seat. Zhou Qiao casually grabbed the arrow and took out a scroll from the tail. He opened it and read it. He shook his head and said, the Lishan sect's disciple entered for 3 days, and only found the right path. Such a disciple is really useless. Wu Fenggu smiled and said, the situation in the realm is not clear. How would Jinren Yuling be willing to let his disciples come with just a few words from me? These two said that they are here to take qi, but in fact, they are here to scout. Zhou Qiao flicked the letter with her finger and said, this is not good. If this goes on, when will we be able to drive those heretics away? Wu Fenggu said, there is no rush. In a few days, the disciples of Yuan Yang, Ping Du, and other sects will arrive. By then, we can stir up this muddy water. In this small realm, there were naturally Taoist sections. As the place where the qi of Earth Yin gathered, the spiritual vigor would be abundant. Therefore, other than those hidden deep in the mountains, which were mostly occupied by the sects, the rest were occupied by demons. The origins of these sects were not simple. Some of them could even be traced back to the few almighties who opened up the small realm. Although the cultivators here could not see through the grotto heaven state because of the restriction of this world, but the realm entry talisman of the Yuxiao school could not withstand the passage of the grotto heaven. Therefore, they could only send the Yuanying cultivators here. If they wanted to take the qi of Earth Yin, they could only find a way to drive them away, which would inevitably make them enemies. More than 1,000 years ago, when Shaoqing entered the small realm to take the qi of Earth Yin, he also encountered many troubles. At that time, he killed many cultivators of this realm and destroyed more than 10 sections. Therefore, the natives did not have a good impression of these outsiders. The Yuxiao school did not want to lose their own disciples. This time, they purposely spread the news when the disaster started, intending to use the power of other sects to wipe them out. The young Taoist frowned and said loudly, "Senior brothers, this is scheming against our fellow Taoists. Even if we benefit from it now, we will be hated in the future." Wu Fenggu laughed and said, "Junior brother, you think too much. Under the 3 disasters, other than me, Shaoqing, and Qinsang sects, no one dares to say that they can pass through it. In order to stabilize the spiritual cave, they will have to swallow the bitter fruit, and they will have to owe me a favor." The young Taoist was unconvinced and said, "Just like what 2 senior brothers think, if they take away all the qi of Earth Yin, what should we do?" Zhou Qiao smiled and said, "Junior brother, since I have opened my doors, how can I not consider this? Just take a good look."